So we'll call to order at 4:13, the board retreat and board training. I'll do a roll call. So Heidi. Here. Kelsey. Here. Jenny. Here. Mara.
Here.
Glenn.
Here.
Robert. Robert will be joining us at a later time. And Crystal Chair here. Pledge allegiance. Flag anywhere?
Way
Are you
outside.
good with that?
The front?
Okay, yeah, in the front. So we'll go this way. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, board agenda for the retreat, at Dan's discretion, do you mind if I move number 2 down to wrap up?
That's fine.
Okay. All right, Diane, do I need an approval on this or we're good? No, we're good. Okay, great. All right. Dan, you want me to turn it over to you first?
Sure.
All right.
So, well, thank you and I appreciate all the feedback and preparing for today's retreat. And so, the first half of our time together is with Elliot Field from Garrett Heman Robertson, who's kind of introduced himself already. And so he's put together a real thorough PowerPoint presentation here. And so it's 4:15 right now. So I think our target is about 45-ish minutes for Elliot to move through his PowerPoint presentation. And talking with him, you can interrupt, ask questions along the way. Kind of a target time of 5:30-ish to have our time with Elliot be done so that we can have a little break for dinner and then start the second half of our time together to develop board superintendent working agreements. So, and I don't think that will hopefully not take 2 hours. I know there was some, just maybe some general time of the board having conversation, good of the order types of how maybe through what we learned today with Elliot and Phil Logger, who's joining us later, maybe some ideas for the board to coalesce around about how this school year will go. So if there's time for that.
Okay.
So with that, I'll turn it over to Elliot.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, board chair, and thanks to the board for having me today. Like Dan said, for this afternoon, for about an hour, I want to walk through a presentation that we've titled Best Practices for School Boards. And what my goals are for it are to really walk through and really examine a lot of the different parts of what it means to be a board and to be an individual board member. I myself am not a board member. I've advised on different boards, and so I haven't sat in your chair, but in advising boards as a whole on various legal matters, there are certain themes and ideas around the structures that come through that I think are important to discuss. As Dan said, if there are questions along the way, please feel free to ask. If you want to reserve them to the end, that's okay too. If there's something that really gets into the nitty gritty, that is a really specific question about a specific incident or series of events, that's something that I'd suggest bringing up with Dan, and then he can address it with me. A lot of what we're going to cover today, some of it may be new to you. I think a lot of it are board overviews and board processes that you may be familiar with. And so if some of that is familiar and you know it, that's great, that's super. I hope to not bore you along the way, but if it reinforces things that you either already know or are pretty certain about, I think that today will have been a success. So we covered a little bit of the introduction. So this is just a really general overview of what I want to cover. And the focus is really in the first or in the second, third, and fourth bullets around school board meetings, around communication protocols, and around required filings and trainings. The third of which is something that each of you as individual board members are likely doing you're not, it's important that you know about some of the trainings, some of the submissions that you have a responsibility to complete, and some of the underlying obligations that you may have, that have some required trainings associated with them. So for the first part, I'm going to dive into school board meetings themselves. And so for starters, you look at the board meeting schedule, and this is going to inform some of the next slides around what is a special meeting, what is a regular meeting. So if this was the composition of the board, I don't know if it was at the meeting that you had your organizational meeting in July, going through the process of setting the schedule for the annual regular meetings, go through that whole process. A consistent theme that's going to come up in my presentation is consult your board policies. They are such a really important instrument that are available to you as board members, that are available to district administrators, that are available to district staff, even students. I mean, every different component and role that is filled in the school, there's some policy that orients toward them. And you as a board in the B sections, you'll see there's a number of different policies, and pretty much most of what I talk about covers to a certain extent those responsibilities and processes. So for instance, in the board meeting schedule 24-25, you have this board policy that talks about establishing who's going to be the chair, who's going to be the vice chair. You're voting on your annual meeting schedule. So there's a real process for it. And periodically we'll get questions from superintendents or from board members who will say, why do we do this at this particular time? Or it's just been this custom. Is there an actual legal requirement that we do it when they're revisiting their practice and their history? And do we just go through these processes because it's something that's always been done? Or is it something that's legally required? Or is it a requirement that we set upon ourselves? And so going to the board policy is a really helpful resource because it can answer those questions for you. And oftentimes what you'll see is they'll have the board policy that the board's adopted and that it's a responsibility that they've created for themselves. But then also often there are footers down below that will describe, it will have citations to different state or federal laws. And so you can do this kind of cross-reference of not only is this something that the board has set itself as a responsibility or adopted based upon a recommendation from another agency, but it's also something that's required by law. Next piece on here is quorum. So quorum is going to be the minimum number of board members that have to participate in order for the governing body to transact business. You need a quorum to do business. You need a quorum to have a meeting. If you don't have a quorum, you don't have a meeting. And as a result, the public body is not able to go about taking action to fulfill its charge of making these important policy, in large part policy decisions, and taking action on behalf of the school district. And then thinking about quorum, there's a lot of different areas that this goes into around specifically public meetings law. And so I'm going to be referencing different laws and different bodies of law that affect public entities and school districts in particular. And public meetings law is really the one that's at the center of all of this. Also, an important point is sometimes there are gatherings of a quorum of public officials such as yourselves, where you're just gathering information. And when that's happening, even if there isn't a specific action that's taking place, like right now, this still amounts to a meeting where the public, and the idea behind it is the public not only has a right to be knowledgeable about the decisions that government is making, in this case, a school board, but also the information that the public body is receiving that they're using to make those decisions. So in the case of this, a 7-member board, you've got 4 members that constitute a quorum, and any action by the board must be carried by a minimum of those 4 members on the 7-member board. And the law assumes that for those who abstain or are not present from the vote are willing to be bound by the action from those who do vote. And that makes sense, right? Because the attendance is really important at board meetings, and also the board business has to get done. There's an agreed upon time and an agreed upon agenda for certain action to be taken. Then if somebody is unable to attend, but all of the other requirements are met to meet that action, that has to be relied upon. As I mentioned, there are a number of different laws that affect the work that you do. And so some of them, I mentioned when I gave a little bit of my background of the work that I do, but one of them is around Oregon's public contracting law. So this has to do with the procurement by the government using public money to purchase goods, to purchase services. There's a lot of designation to the superintendent just to be able to conduct business. But at the same time, there are certain instances where approvals will go before the board, and different district administrators or personnel will provide background of why the potential purchase or why something is going out for bid. You'll often see that if it's going through a request for proposal or for an invitation to bid, that the board has some involvement in that. The board may have also some involvement when it comes to labor negotiations, and ultimately at the end of the conclusion of the labor negotiation of approving a contract between the district and its associations. And all of that relates to the Public Employees Collective Bargaining Act, or PECBA is the short name that you may likely know of it. But what we're going to focus on is the Oregon Public Meetings Law. Different states have different names for it. Sometimes they call it the Sunshine Law, and the relationship between both public meetings and public records. For purposes of tonight, I'm going to focus mostly on the public meetings law. So we'll come back to that. And so to try and just boil it down to the biggest, most important takeaways, and this may be something just reinforcing something that you know, is having public meetings be noticed and be open to the public. And you're going to cure and address a lot of significant issues that may come up by virtue of fulfilling both of those two requirements. And working with the superintendent, working with the board secretary is of the utmost importance when you're putting together an agenda that covers the business that's going to be addressed at a particular public meeting, and getting that information organized and published well in advance. The definition for time period for providing notice is what I would say, I would confess is, let's call it a little legally sounding type term. It's got to be reasonably calculated to give actual notice of the time and place for a regular meeting. So what does reasonably calculated mean? Well, not exactly certain. However, one key piece of additional information that we get is there are regular meetings, special meetings, and emergency meetings. I'm jumping ahead in my slides here, but the statute says for special meetings, there has to be at least 24 hours notice of it being, of the agenda being published. So it stands to reason that a regular meeting should be at or in excess of that amount of time. And where my presentation is going to kind of interweave with other things is, so what happens if we don't meet that criteria? And what happens if we don't meet that criteria is there's a risk of complaints being submitted around ethics issues for not complying with public meetings law. And it also runs the risk of the action that the board takes at a meeting that wasn't noticed, putting in jeopardy those decisions that were made at that meeting as not fulfilling the requirements, the legal requirements for them. So just being really vigilant and cautious to when the notice gets published and when the meeting occurs, time, place, what's going on, and providing the public with adequate notice, both of the meeting that's taking place and the openness for the public to attend, not specifically participate, which gets me into the distinction between those two for open meetings versus open meetings that have the availability of public comment. So I'll stop right there. If there's any comments or questions.
I have a couple on the quorum requirements. this is my seventh year on the board. So on the quorum requirements, we have a 7-member board, obviously. I know of a situation where we've had 2 members missing. Just through, you know what I mean, people come and go. What happens to those quorum requirements? Is it always 4? So even if we have two seats empty?
So that's the recommendation that we provide is, yes, that it will, that for a 7-member board, there needs to be a vote of 4 for the action to be passed. That the quorum doesn't get chopped down based upon the reduced number of folks who are present. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually it does, as we've run into that a couple of times, and I mean, I didn't realize how much turnover there was gonna be on the board. There's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean,
Honestly, that's a good question, because I wasn't aware.
Yeah.
When we're talking about quorums. I thought under the new, when I went to that, when I listened to that webinar about the new public meeting law. I thought that when you go for, like, if we take a tour of a school. So, you know, I was thinking when you're calling that information gathering. I thought they said that does not have to actually necessarily fall under a public meeting. Because you're just touring, you're just gathering information in that sense, and so. You know, it's not necessarily, even though the whole board might be present, it's not necessarily considered a public meeting.
I'm glad you brought that up because there are 2 specific carve outs in that definition of meeting. One is the scenario that you described where it's an organized site visit for purposes of, I think it's visiting or inspecting a particular program or project is one. And then the other one, which I don't know, folks here attend or not, but it's for the board's participation at conventions for state, federal, or local organizations of which the board or individual board members are a member. So it contemplates those 2 kinds of scenarios where the board may be going in total out there for it. Now, that being said, and I certainly don't think that you're implying any of this, that it provides any kind of cover for the board to then be doing board stuff, right? Around deliberating over issues or transacting business. And a lot of this also has a connection with what I would just say is the appearance of impropriety, right? If the board's getting together, in large part, it should be at a notice meeting with an agenda where there's business that's being transacted. But the law does contemplate that there are scenarios like you described, or at a particular convention that says meeting does not equal these 2 things. Glad you brought that up, absolutely. And it is a scenario where you would be, in a way, gathering information, but it looks different than something like this, where I'm coming to a gathering and providing specific information to each of you. Another thing that comes up, and it's a fantastic facility, is also considering around public access for individuals with disabilities. If there are different places, sometimes in school districts, if there are buildings that are under construction or space issues that come up, ensuring that if there is a public meeting that it is open to the public, that the disability accessibility issues are addressed. And so it is indeed available for people to participate and attend. So here you see my reference out to the district board policy that addresses public comment. And this is something that I imagine the board chair, who at the time is leading the meeting, has responsibility to really shepherd through, because it's an important part of what we're doing here, right? So you are popularly elected officials engaging in a democratic process, and it's a very important one. The public meetings law requires that public meetings be open to the public, but it doesn't require a public comment section to it. That being said, public comment is customary. It's something that happens in a lot of public bodies, school boards, and others, to be able to provide the public with an opportunity to address government officials regarding business of the particular agency. The district has a procedure or policy guidelines that informs the board policy BDDH around public meetings. I saw this is something that's public and available on the district's website. And so I encourage you, if you haven't familiarized yourself with these guidelines. And it really informs what the policy that the district has. They do a good job of matching up around the purpose of this, which is to provide the public with an opportunity to address the board in an organized manner. It's important to note and different boards handle things differently, that the focus of this is for the members of the public to share their viewpoint on matters on district business. And from my perspective, as the attorney advising school boards on it, not an opportunity for debate, not much of an opportunity for verbal exchange, but rather to have a fair and impartial process by which folks can sign up and approach and provide, if it's 2 minutes, if it's 3 minutes, whatever is decided upon, to be able to speak their piece to the board in an organized manner. As I mentioned, Oregon Public Meeting Law doesn't require public comment to be a feature, but only that they attend. And since the district is a public body and has adopted these policies where public comment is incorporated into the process, it's important to review the policies, review the guidelines, and so the practice matches up with the guidelines that are posted. And what the public, if they're going in and reading about what public comment involves, that their expectations match up with how things go forward at the board meeting, to the best of their ability.
So one quick question I have is, so where does First Amendment right versus hate speech, where does that cross the line, and can you curb that within the 3 minutes that they're provided?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's a real challenge because the public comment area for a public meeting, because as a school district, as a public body, we encapsulate the government, right? So the First Amendment applies to state action, to government actors. And so the public forum nature of public comment, there is going to be leniency for those First Amendment rights to come up against reasonable time, place, and manner. That is the important responsibility of the board chair to make those determinations about when that speech is becoming disruptive, when that speech is being contrary to the aims and the purposes of the district, when those remarks run up against what the decorum kind of expectations are, regardless of the message. And I think that's something that's really important is, I mean, your example was hate speech, but one thing where I think school boards can really get into trouble is we want to hear about this, we don't want to hear about that. And so having that kind of the legal term for that is going to be viewpoint discrimination. And so that can be worrisome. But what your example is about if there is a profanity laden presentation, or if there are really vitriolic comments being made, or specific students are being called out, there are going to be grounds for you as the board chair to rein that in and to cut off public comment. Now, that being said, school districts can get sued for a lot of different reasons, and the microscope is up really high on this issue around free speech in the public school context. So it is a challenge, but I think that following those guidelines uniformly is an important aspect of it. The other thing that I would point to is at the district level, this comes up less in board meetings, but another board policy that is enshrined in Oregon law is around every student belongs. And so there are some very specific prohibitions against certain kinds of hate speech, against certain kinds of bias incidents. And the aim of those laws are less toward being punitive or being punishment, more toward being educational. And so there are some different tools, maybe not in the middle of the meeting instance, but in the aftermath of that the district can deploy evenly and uniformly and not having to recreate the wheel. when there is an issue that is of a sensitive nature like that comes up. Yeah,
And if I could just piggyback on that a little bit, I think, you know, Elliot's talking about making sure that any curbing of that is consistently applied. But also the other thing, he mentioned students, but also mentioning staff.
Mhm.
And making sure that, I mean, in terms of just a pure risk analysis, I would rather take the risk of curbing free speech than to get a claim that we did not protect an employee or a student. I'd rather, you know, just from a cost analysis, I would rather curb free speech and deal with a challenge that I was stopped versus getting some kind of grievance, getting some kind of tort claim that an employee was disparaged publicly and the board did nothing to stop it. I don't know if you agree with that, but I would certainly
well-
rather take that risk on a free speech versus to let someone get
Mhm.
disparaged.
Well, we've dealt with that
Yeah,
on a
Yeah.
number of occasions.
Excessively.
And quite frankly, where does our line from protecting free speech go against protecting the employees and being unfairly or libelously, you know, disparaged?
and I use more words to try and be helpful, because I didn't want the shortest answer to be,
Mhm.
to come across as flippant, but it really is. The line it's tough to demarcate, because there are competing interests on both sides. Philosophically, personally, emotionally, legally, all across the board, and so those are what those lines and those risks of what a district is willing to take. There's no Cliff Notes version to be able to provide the shorthand answer for it. It can be challenging.
and I think going back to policy is if we outline what those expectations are, at least we can anchor them in the fact that these were pre-described before somebody went on a rant. And then we can, you know, and if necessary, sometimes boards have to do resets if we're gonna reset based on, and so try to reestablish what those norms and expectations are.
That's a good point.
I wondered if we could address that by trying to clarify for the public the difference between, we're drawing a line, comment, complaint. And we have a process for either and say, well, you're naming names, that's complaint, you work through this other process. Or no, that's a comment, so we'll receive that. And just having that be part of our guidelines, so they know up front if you're gonna name names or that's a complaint, so you work through this other. And it does tell them that, maybe they need to read it.
And the existence of those guidelines are important to be able to make that even-handed, uniform referral where there is that, whether it addresses the specific
Mhm.
heightened emotions that are happening is a separate issue, and I'm appreciative of that. But being able to direct someone to a specific resource that exists to say, this is what the board, this sounds like a complaint that you are raising, and there is a complaint process for you. We encourage you to have this avenue to be able to pursue this lowercase g grievance.
So is this? Diane, is this BDDHAR? Is it like an AR or is it like a,
The guidelines and protocols? No.
it's just,
It's just our guidelines, in fact, Lynn and I worked through them, and Kylie and I worked through them. And including the bulletin boards. And it's on the website, and it's
Okay.
actually printed on the table at every meeting.
all right, awesome. Refer to the table.
Moving on to what should be a more innocuous subject. Types of meetings, so. We're zooming out some, there's gonna be different kinds of meetings. You've got your regular board meetings that are established and calendared at the organizational meeting, referencing that BCB policy that occur, and so the public has an expectation of when those meetings are going to occur, where they're going to occur in the time, so they're aware, even if they don't know at the beginning of the school year what is going to be on the agenda, they know exactly when they are and can plan accordingly, including news media, if they're interested in attending the public meetings, which I'll touch on news media participation and attendance in meetings shortly. However, sometimes there needs to be special board meetings if there is if there's bargaining that's happening and a contract is agreed upon and it goes to the membership and it wants to go to the board and payroll is involved and there's COLA, then there may be a specific need to convene a special meeting. And so working with the board secretary, working with the superintendent and your leadership for ensuring that all of those previously discussed appropriate agendizing and notice requirements are satisfied to be able to convene the special meeting at least 24 hours in advance. So everyone who is in the school community has the opportunity to have notice of it and to be able to attend it. The third is an emergency board meeting, and I would put that like way down low on number 3. We're talking real emergencies. It's very, very rare, at least in my career, that emergency meetings have been convened. They're for real calamities. I mean, I've seen it in response to if there's some kind of significantly destructive fire and the board has to take action around approval related to allocating resources for remediation. The requirements for it are, it has to be a real actual emergency at the meeting. The emergent nature of the meeting has to be articulated. And courts, if there's action taken in those emergency meetings and that action is challenged, courts are going to be they're going to highly scrutinize what the basis was for the meeting. And fortunately, this has happened very, very few times in my career, such that you can put together an agenda and convene a special meeting. So I would say be aware of it, and I wouldn't put it at the top of the toolbox for convening for an emergency meeting. Any questions about that? I don't want to be too heavy-handed about that, but sometimes it can be the press of business sometimes requires a meeting, and it may seem enchanting at some point, but unless it's really, really serious, I recommend against deploying that. And then there's the types of meetings, business sessions, work sessions, and then for my purposes, I want to focus on discussing executive sessions or the closed sessions that aren't going to be open to the general public. So the governing body, the school board has the ability under Oregon law to convene outside the presence of the public for very specific prescribed reasons that are described in the law. And if certain prerequisites are met, the board can meet in executive session to consider certain matters. The two pieces from that that I have on here are discussion must be directly related to the specific purpose cited. So on the agenda, if the board is meeting in executive session, the subject matter that's being discussed has to be included in that agenda, not the details of what's being discussed, but the basis that forms the legal reason for the board to meet in there. And so I'll give an example about where discussion must be directly related to a specific purpose cited and how that could go awry. Completely hypothetical situation, not pulled from any of my work specifically, but generally, which is one of the legal bases is for the board to consult with legal counsel over pending litigation, over an existing lawsuit, or over a lawsuit that is certain to be filed or expected to be filed. And that makes sense, right? Because a litigation is an adversarial process. There's a plaintiff and a defendant, and they have a duty, they each have a lawyer, and the lawyer has a duty of confidentiality to them. Those communications are privileged. And so if a school district were a party to litigation and they had to have every strategy meeting with their lawyer and the board, or every discussion about potential settlement discussed at a public meeting, that puts them at a significant disadvantage. Now, an example of where this could possibly go awry is, let's say that there is a personal injury lawsuit, a student filed a lawsuit against the school district because they fell on some broken blacktop at the middle school basketball court. And so it's properly agendized and we go into executive session and I'm discussing with the school board about what the claims are, what the potential damages are, what the mediation schedule's looking like, what the probability of resolution is, what we think the exposure is. And in the course of that conversation, a completely well-meaning board member wants to talk about, well, if this is happening at the middle school, what does the high school conditions look like? Is the blacktop like this at the high school? And if so, is there any kind of grant money that we can get to have some paving done to try and we are now outside of the subject of what we're talking about in the lawsuit, right? It is not the agendized thing that we talked about. There's nothing nefarious going on. There's no ill will associated with that kind of conversation. This is a board member who's sitting in their position because they care deeply about student safety. They care deeply about the schools that they work for in their capacity as a public official, and they have just violated public meeting law. And so the gist for that is to be very cognizant of what the board specifically is telling the public about what they're discussing in executive session, and to really keep those boundaries tight to avoid any potential legally well-meaning and mistaken public meeting violation. Any questions about that hypothetical?
Is that the kind of situation where board members are advised to stop that and even exit the room, protect themselves?
Well,
That conversation were to continue
oh, meaning,
off subject.
yeah, I mean, I suppose that could be an extreme outcome of it. I think that in those instances, often when I've been in there and when I've worked with the board chairs, they're doing a lot of the directing traffic of saying, I think we're getting a little far afield. Let's return to this particular subject and these particular matters. And all the times that I can remember, if there is something that even is starting to veer off into something that's off subject or something that's more policy oriented, that is grounds to be discussed in open session, it gets redirected back to a specific subject matter. So another part of this is, aside from the green note around the discussion must be directly related to the specific purpose, is the information from executive session must be maintained as confidential. And so there'll be meeting minutes that are taken in executive session, and those meeting minutes are treated differently than the meeting minutes that are maintained as part of the public meeting. And so they are held as confidential. If there's a public records request for them, the district goes through the process of characterizing them as exempt. There's one specific instance where if there is a court order to examine what's called in camera, sometimes if there's a debate over whether in fact those minutes should be confidential, there's a process for a judge to look at them and say, yes, they are, or no, they aren't. But for the most part, the vast majority of the time, if there are minutes that are being taken in executive session, those minutes are going to be held confidential. And then what I've got here is just a list. The list is longer, and the law around allowed reasons to go into executive session don't just apply to school districts, they apply to all different kinds of public bodies. So there's not a lot of work with nuclear material, I don't think, in North Marion, so I didn't include those reasons, but these are some of the most frequent bases for going into executive session. And if you go through them, you'll see even if you haven't been in executive session for these reasons, I think it makes sense that these are the kinds of things that are permissive to be discussed outside the presence of the public, when you are consulting with an attorney, when you are conducting an expulsion hearing or an expulsion hearing appeal, deliberating, not going through the process of bargaining, but deliberating with the district designated labor negotiator with updates in bargaining, hiring, dismissal, hearing complaints. And this is where I would encourage and just raise the importance of the relationship between the board, board leadership, superintendent and other district administrator leaders, and legal counsel too, because among these, there are a lot of different specific nuances, a lot of different wrinkles associated with whether the executive session can be held for this reason. So I'm calling out here that this is a broad description, and I'll just give one or two examples of that. So, for instance, if there is an issue around discussing hiring of a superintendent, that discussion has some prerequisites before the board can discuss it in executive session. A vacancy has to be posted. Board has to have adopted certain kinds of criteria around hiring. The public has had to have the opportunity to weigh in on that. And there are these different hurdles that have to be met before the board can discuss that particular issue in executive session. For expulsion hearings, when it's something that comes before the board, and I don't know how North Marion does it, most school districts will have a designee, whether a principal or a hearings officer, if there is an instance where there's an expulsion, and then if they have an appeal, it might go before the board. But for expulsion hearings, those take place in executive session, and it's, to my mind, I think the only instance where the board can vote in executive session. So the law is very specific that no board action vote may take place in executive session. The consideration, the information gathering, the hearing, all of the discussion can take place in executive session, and then adjourning back into an open session to take a vote for appropriate action on whatever that is. For something like an expulsion, you can vote in executive session, which always makes me feel kind of uncomfortable and unsettled because it's something that happens so rarely. And there are other examples around this, like consulting with legal counsel. Legal counsel's got to be there contemporaneously. It can't be just like a letter or something like that that goes through. There may be other grounds to go into executive session for that, but there are those. And then there are some relatively new ones that have been added. So I put that on there. Considering matters related to school safety or a school safety plan or a plan that responds to safety threats made toward a school. And you can appreciate, because the confidential nature of what is going into that planning and development around that, it's important to have that be just within the district board when making that decision. On the complaint issue, I just want to point out is when there is a dismissal hearing or when there is a complaint hearing, and what you'll see in form letters and in different rules related to executive session is the person against whom the complaint is made, the person who is facing potential dismissal, the default is executive session, but they can elect to have the hearing take place in open session. So that's also something that may, I don't want to say get taken out of your control, but if they have that option that they're electing, they have that right to do that. So working with the superintendent, HR, and legal counsel around that to really have agreement and consensus about, can we go into executive session? What are the prerequisites? And are there any exceptions to what would normally happen in an executive session?
Are the complaints that we talk about in executive session only related to HR complaints or personnel complaints, or could it be like the public has a complaint, who requests, like, How does an executive session get?
It can happen in a number of different ways, so it's not just limited to personnel. The KL complaint process has its various steps. And the hope with that process is that it gets resolved at the building level. If it's not there, it can get resolved at the superintendent level without any kind of elaborate investigation or a lot of time that passes. That's not always the case, and so sometimes it goes past the superintendent level and can reach the level of the board. And in those cases, the board hearing option is what plays itself out. Default would be for it to take place in executive session, and the complainant can elect for it to occur in open session. And to answer your question about the subject matter, it could be about mold in classrooms. It could be a parent's complaint about the district's appropriate response to fill in the blank. It doesn't have to be unique to being personnel.
So when you have, because I've run into this a couple of times too, when you've got new members on your board and you need to onboard them on ongoing litigation or complaints or just all the things that happen. What's the most efficient way to do that? Because I'm assuming you can't just call an executive session to bring everybody up to speed if you're not actually, like, if it's not actually dealing with stuff that's immediate, but they have to be brought up to speed, otherwise you can't make an informed decision if you're being called upon to, to make a decision. So,
That's a good question, and I think the shorthand is consulting with the superintendent around what the issue is, what the history is behind it. Because they'll, and there may be turnover in a lot of directions, and that just presents a challenge, period, full stop. But that would be my recommendation, would be consulting with the appropriate administrator around gathering that institutional knowledge. Not to be making any kind of individual decisions about it, but just to be information gathering to get up to speed.
Yeah, when in my previous role as HR director, when we would get new board members and if there was a grievance that was kind of outstanding, or there was a complaint, or we had one tort claim that was being handled by PACE, is, getting those board members up to speed to say, hey, this may not come up for the next 3 months, or it could be next month, but here's what you need to know is kind of the things that are still unresolved, that just so this doesn't surprise you.
yeah. So that's actually a good strategy, because then it puts it back on you in order to make sure that the board is informed rather than putting it on leadership to try and fill in the gaps, or maybe, so.
And that accidental serial meeting that,
That's what I'm trying to avoid.
that could avoid happening. It's like,
Still
here's the things that you need to know so that you're prepared that if this gets on next month's exec session, here's the background that you haven't been aware of.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. I'm glad that you raised that, because it could precipitate that game of telephone, and then in an inadvertent meeting could conceivably occur.
And I wanted to clarify with you, we cannot negotiate a superintendent's contract. Like the moving parts, the things in executive session, correct? That has to be done between like an appointed representative of the board and the negotiator for the.
Yeah, the law is, I'll just answer it very briefly. The law is very clear that discussion of compensation can't take place in executive session.
Okay.
Um,
do that. No, I know you did, but we have, actually, I wanted the rest of the board here, because it is the most awful process in the world when you're trying to get a contract put together. Well, and you cannot, you can't, you literally can't like bring everybody up to speed or talk about something in executive session. But you do need everybody's approval on it.
yes.
So that's when you put on the parameters from this
Yeah.
map to this map.
And I was gonna say, a lot of it is done ahead of time, like you said, so a lot of it's, this is what we want out of the contract, please don't do that, so, you know what I mean, so.
I was
So,
gonna tell, just,
please.
sorry.
No, please.
During COVID and we had the mask law, some of the board members here recall, we did have a board hearing. I've only had 2 board hearings in my entire 28-year career. And that was one of them, and it was a grievance that was filed against the principal for making the daughter wear the mask. That. were at some of those meetings. So that went to the level of the board, so.
Far and few between.
We also had a special meeting too.
Yeah.
Again, related to COVID. Because the pitchforks were coming out. And I think we had Silverton, who had actually had property damage done. So we decided to unmask at a special meeting.
Yeah,
No, at an emergency meeting. I
Emergency.
mean, it was literally a couple hours. That's the only time I've ever seen it.
Going back to, oh, please.
I do have a question regarding executive session. So say a member of the public who attended an executive session releases information from the executive session.
The member of the public would not be at an executive session.
Okay, Diane, let me finish.
Okay.
So this has happened. Is there any jurisdiction within the district? Because in the city realm, then that executive session becomes open. How does that play out for a school board?
So in a scenario, if someone over whom, so say they're the complainant, if someone over whom the district doesn't have any control and doesn't have any jurisdiction, they have limited, because they have limited control, they can't prohibit that person from going out and speaking their mind. But that wouldn't waive the work that the district has done in the course of that. What would waive it is if the district had allowed other members of the public in, or if the district themselves had published information about it, then it would be subject to disclosure likely through a public records request as something that wasn't maintained in confidentiality such that it maintained that exempt status from a public records request. But a person electing to go out and share information about it doesn't make it public. So another, a blunter kind of example would be in the course of an expulsion hearing, if in the event a parent went out and disclosed any number of pieces of information about their students' personally identifiable information outside of the executive session expulsion meeting, all of the FERPA obligations that are being upheld by the district would remain. It wouldn't release that information or create any waiver on the part of the district.
All right,
Look to your board policy. You've got one that focuses specifically on executive session. And this is something, if it ever comes up, that can be available to the public. Reading 192.660 with, it's like A through double M of subsections can be a little bit daunting, but if a member of the public approaches the superintendent or has a question about what is this that they're doing that I can't come to, this is a place that can just be uniformly provided as a resource to a member of the public that's available to them, that walks through what it means to be in executive session. Something that is also important as board members for you to know about is the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. So OGEC covers a number of different areas around ethics and around public officials. You may have familiarity with them for any number of reasons around conflicts of interest or gifts or honoraria or your statements of economic interest. But one area that they also oversee is if there is an allegation of violation of public meeting law with respect to executive sessions, a complaint will get submitted to OGEC. And so what we have here is they themselves are a public body, which I always think about the meta question about OGEC in there. Yeah, I have no doubt that they are very familiar with the rules and follow it, but I'm just wondering if OGEC is having a complaint. So they're responsible for enforcing Oregon's ethics laws. And they also have this jurisdiction over public meetings law and executive session. And the documents that reflect their decisions or final dispositions when complaints are made against individual board members or against 7 individual board members based upon their particular conduct at a public meeting in executive session or otherwise. Those are available on the OGE website. So you can see other public bodies that have gone through this process for it. Rare is the case that you see violations of law that are intentional or that are reckless. So some fact patterns that I saw in this were discussing the contract of a current employee, discussing a property developer's request for reimbursement, something that falls outside of one of these permitted statutory grounds. So those are kind of hyper-specific areas, but my point around this is that so you're familiar with it, this is the mechanism through which an individual board member such as yourself might get involved if there were a complaint alleging a violation of executive session that the board members individually or as a whole didn't stay within the confines of a permitted reason. If they went in for an impermissible reason, so a complaint gets filed, there's something that's called the preliminary phase. Then it goes before the OGEC board and they vote whether to investigate. And there's different kinds of penalties in the event that there is a violation of law. I don't want to raise this to frighten anybody, just to be aware of what's out there around it.
Can you restate the staff member?
Oh, it was, I think that fact, and that it wasn't anybody that I had represented, I just saw it in the disposition, meaning like the example. I
Yeah,
think it was, negotiating a salary of a current employee. It wasn't anything around hiring or firing, and it was like outside of the salary schedule. It was just something that had gone in executive session, and I think it was agendized as something incorrect.
mm,
In the Oregon Department of Justice has a public meetings and public records manual. And they provide sample script. You may have one already. If you don't, there is this sample script that describes the announcement of going into executive session. And it does really two things or multiple things. One, it announces the reason that the board is going into executive session. Number two, it asks that all members of the public or all members of the audience who aren't germane to the discussion be excused and leave. And three, it gives direction to news media around their ability to remain in the executive session, but their direction not to report on the subjects that are discussed that are appropriately agendized. So this was something that when I started practicing in Oregon that I learned for the first time, because most of the states that I come from didn't have this, where news media could sit in on executive session. But in my experience, the Department of Justice manual describes it as there's a strong history of news media respecting and honoring the non-disclosure requirement, and then the news media members being there kind of a little bit in a watchdog role and also in just an information gathering role, but then they don't disseminate that information that is appropriately brought in executive session. And honestly, that's borne out in the time that I've been there, been here. It is important I would strongly urge the board to have that language in there when they're going into executive session around directing news media, their permission to attend, but that they are specifically directed not to report or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about the subjects during the executive session. And then the other part that's in there, where I mentioned that no final action, except in expulsion context, no final action can be said. It gets reiterated in this sample script as well. So it really covers a lot of the important high points around executive session. Moving on, and I want to be respectful of time, so I'm going to zoom through a lot of this. But it was mentioned earlier around serial communications. So the subject matter here is communication protocols, but I think it breaks down into a bunch of different areas. One of which is, as a board member, if I get an email from the public, what's my role? If I'm a board member and I get an email from the union, what's my role? If I get the fill in the blank, parent, other members, and really keeping in mind that the day-to-day operations are the responsibility of the superintendent and the leadership at the district. And that you as the public body and the public officials have a responsibility, very important responsibility around setting policy. And so to the extent possible, when those communications are coming in that are at a granular level or are at the building level, to facilitate communication with the superintendent who has that responsibility over operations to get that in the right place. That's sort of like one area that I'm talking about with communication protocol. Second area is around what we discussed around serial communications. And so just in 2023, the definition, I think, of convening was modified to include serial electronic written communications among participants. So what that is A emails B, B emails C, C emails D, D emails back to A. No quorum was met on any of those emails, but there is a discussion going on among board members that could be deliberation on a matter about transacting business. And there you have meeting that's just taken place without it being properly noticed, without it being agendized. And so what we've got here is what you would typically understand as a meeting, which is gathering in a physical location. We're using Zoom, telephonic technology, fill in the blank, to communicate contemporaneously. Using an intermediary to communicate among participants, which you can understand the same philosophy applies of, well, I'm not talking to you, but I'm just using this person in between to share the messages. So we're having this meeting, even though we're not in the same place at the same time. So just be cognizant of serial electronic communications, most specifically, the reply all button. So if you can just, I'm not a tech guy, if you could just delete the reply all button. Be cognizant of that, because again, there can be an inadvertent aspect, there often is an inadvertent aspect to this. Just to be aware of that and avoiding these kinds of scenarios where a quorum could be met, business could be transacted.
Just a quick, Elliot mentioned the OGEC, and they also govern this, well, this would be a violation of public meeting law, so they govern the kind of, the determining factor. And one thing I'll just point out is they do have a phone number you can call, and you can ask questions, and you can ask them anonymously to say, hey, would this be something? And they, obviously, their answer is not going to be, you know, defending you. They're not gonna give that to you in writing that you're okay, but they are a really good resource. To, you know, I just wanna be on the side of caution, so they are a really valuable resource and there to help. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good plug for OGEC. They also have, and I have it linked in here, and if you have the PDF of the presentation, you have the link to the guide to public officials that covers the executive session matters. It will cover some of what I'll touch on here around statements of economic interest, around actual conflicts, around potential conflicts of interest outside the public meeting context, but all under the OGEC umbrella. Another aspect of communication is board members, public records. The definition of a public record is very broad. And the intention is, the default is disclosure. You don't start with the exceptions and then determine whether it's something that can be turned over. You start with everything is a public record and some things are exempt. And so that includes board communication as it relates to your business as a board member. So using your AOL email way back.
I was like,
Using, let's go for a laugh. Using your personal email address, doesn't separate, that document from being a public, a record, nor does using your own personal device. If it is something that is written and something that is within the control custody of the public body and it pertains to the transaction of business, it's going to be a public record. And so, being aware of that is just really important. It should govern conduct in the way of not that you're finding different ways to not disclose, but just being aware of what you're writing, what you're communicating, and the openness to that falls under this very broad public meeting law. Enforcement of this, I won't get into the details of this, but enforcement of this goes through the county district attorney's office. So if there is a dispute over whether a document ought to be disclosed or whether a public body isn't complying with public records law, a petition can be made to the district attorney, and then an assistant district attorney will make a determination about issuing an order, whether those documents have to be turned over.
And I'm very familiar with that process, and so if there's ever a question about that, I can certainly help in that determination.
For all of your cell phone, text messaging, that's also.
Yes. Yep, if that's a writing, yeah, text messages, don't take it out of it, Google Chats and Teams meeting communications, those are still writings that are being communicated. The informal nature of some communications can lead to people being more casual and thinking less specifically about what they're doing in the workplace or for their public body, but if it's a writing about district business and within its control, it's going to be a public record, very broadly defined law. This is just a summary that I've got here around this, which is, I didn't touch on the green one because you all seem like very diligent people. So it's just if you've got a district email address or whatever mechanism you have through which you can be communicated with by the public or by the superintendent to monitor that, avoiding forwarding and replying all and your awareness about district business communications and writings amounting to public records subject to disclosure. Trying to boil down the convoluted nature of your work into a single slide is utilize the resources that you have as the board secretary, superintendent, district administrators. If there is a question that's focusing something specifically on an operations issue, I imagine this happens not infrequently. And encouraging a different resource or funneling that communication to the superintendent or to a district administrator. Short responses, you're not going to set off the alarms around improper controls. If you have something like thanks, refer them to this other person, because you're still in this community, right? You want to have appropriate decorum and be responsive to people, but there's some pretty circumscribed limits to that as an individual board member.
And I would just add to that you definitely need to let the board chair know.
And ultimately, you're acting as a body, right? I mean, you don't want to have individual board members taking unilateral action. Same kinds of questions around here. When in doubt, send it to the superintendent. And look through your board policies, BBF, BCB, do a good job, which I won't rehash here, around demarcating the difference between what the superintendent and other district administrators do and what the board's important roles and responsibilities are. Another area that I want to highlight here is if you're contacted by the union and the infusion of labor law into this, and again, avoiding, even with best intentions of trying to work out an issue or a piece of conflict, that could amount to a board member dealing directly with an individual representative employee as opposed to the district engaging in labor management discussions or bargaining with the association, who is the designated bargaining unit for classified or certified staff. Let this delve into some areas of you as individual elected officials. So it has more to do with your duties and responsibilities individually. And so it's really important that you're aware of when you're confronted with an actual conflict of interest, when you're confronted with a potential conflict of interest, and being able to just know when those come up. I don't want to rehash the specific definitions for that. The OGEC Guide to Public Officials, which is on the link right here, provides both examples, which I provide here, of this is what would amount to a potential conflict of interest. The school district is considering issuing an RFP for tech services, and a board member's sibling owns a tech business and is likely going to be responding to that RFP. There's no conflict of interest at that point yet, because a decision by one of you, by you as a board member, is not creating a financial interest for them or avoiding financial detriment to them. But if that contract, if they're selected for it and the board is put to approving that contract, now you've got an actual conflict of interest, and certain declarations and avoidance and discussion, debate, and vote arise. So utilize that guide for public officials through OGEC. And also whatever's in this presentation, you're welcome to use. Again, echoing this, there's another layer of this around board policy. So board policy addresses this. You'll see a lot of it tracks what's in the government ethics law and what's in the guide to public officials. And then this, I'll be candid, because I advise boards as a whole and not individual board members, I have less familiarities. You may have a thing or two to teach me about this, but I'm focusing specifically on this. So relatively new statements of economic interest for elected officials around providing information for elected officials. And sorry, I'm jumping around. I'll back up to the previous one around board members holding positions in public office, and the obligation to disclose household income information, real property ownership aside from your principal residence, other household members over 18 and their income. And so there's a website for it, and it walks through the whole process of what board members' obligations are to disclose these statements of economic interest. And if you look on the next page, there are some resources that link there. So let me back up a little bit. Any questions? I realize I zipped forward.
I'll make a note for the public record that Robert joined the meeting at 5:26.
I have a question about the mandatory reporting for, as a mandatory reporter. Exactly. As board members, who qualifies as us to pass that information on to? If we pass that on to an administrator here, does that do it, or does it have to go to somebody in law enforcement or somebody in at a higher agency?
You're welcome to.
Yeah,
Yeah. You're happy to go.
You have to be the reporter to DHS or law enforcement.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I
So-
wanted to clarify, so.
So minor clarification, the law says that so what this is about is if a group of people, physicians, optometrists, chiropractors, law enforcement officers, attorneys, audiologists, and recently school board and ESD board members fall under this umbrella of mandatory reporters who, if they have reasonable cause to believe that somebody is a victim is experiencing child abuse or neglect, or that they're aware of somebody who's engaging in child abuse or neglect, they have an obligation to report or cause to be reported to either DHS or law enforcement to make that mandatory report. So the only wrinkle I would say under it is the cause to be reported. And the reason, I agree with the superintendent that you make the call. Like you are now a man, specifically, and other people
Sure.
are mandatory reporters. And I think what happens is if there is that delegation and too much reliance on that cause to be reported, it can fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing that you want to do. Report. If you have reasonable cause to believe if it meets that criteria. The situation that I've seen this happen is, an employee who is a mandatory reporter, a school employee, learns of something and upon learning it is extraordinarily distraught. And they go through the correct process of going to their principal or their supervisor or their building administrator, and they sit in the room while the building administrator makes the report. And so it covers that cause to be reported, because if you just focus on who is the individual who learned of this, did they make a report? No, they did not, but the report was completed and accomplished. So there are scenarios where it makes sense, but ultimately I would say you have the mandatory duty obligation, it's your obligation to do it yourself.
Okay.
But I would also say that, you know, what I would, if you were to call me and say, you know, I think we might have a situation here where it might fall under mandatory, you know, reporting requirement to call me and say, what do you think? Most times I advise people to say, if your gut tells you it is, it probably should be, let somebody else decide on that. But the other side is, you know, why don't you come down and let's call together?
Yeah.
So for someone who never does this to someone who's done this for a long time, I'd much rather have you come down and say, let's do this together, so you feel good about, I did my legally responsible thing, and I was assisted by someone who is more familiar with the process.
Absolutely. And then leaving on this, the last piece that I want to share with you is this annual training requirement on public meetings law. So this is a new law, HB 2805. I think this was from 2023, requiring new board members, or excuse me, new law requiring board members, of public bodies with a fiscal expenditure of a certain amount to attend, it's $1 million, to attend and view public meetings training on an annual basis. And so I went to the RGE website today just to see what it has there. And there are these 60 to 90 minute, they have live sessions and they have recorded sessions. It's free of charge. And it walks through a lot of what we've discussed today around public meetings, around executive session. And it even says on there what satisfies the legal requirement and what's kind of extra and additional study that you can do. I am not a sanctioned deliverer of that training, so this doesn't count as it, but hopefully when you go through the process, you'll see it won't be too much of a surprise, and some of it will harken back to what we've covered today. The last piece of my presentation has some information around parliamentary procedure. It's Robert's Rules 30,000 foot level. Have it at your disposal. I'm not going to cover it because we're at just above 5:30. And I want to be respectful of the ongoing retreat, but you'll see here it has what its purpose is and around basic principles and voting. So a lot of information. We took some breaks along the way for questions, but if there's any additional questions that I can address, I'd be more than happy to discuss and answer. Also, Dan knows where to find it. Well, I thank you for your time, and based upon all the hypotheticals and questions that you're asking, you're a sweet board that's got some real genuine curiosity and care. I can tell for this. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for coming through.
I might just make one comment in going through this OGEC training, is that they emphasized at the end of the session that we are focusing more on education. And And I think they genuinely meant that. They just meant if you've made a mistake and you've crossed the line, they'll just send you a letter and say, here's what you need to do to correct that. They're not going to come down hard on it initially.
I would, looking at the way that the orders have shaken out, and usually what they're called are, stipulated orders, where the investigator engages with the individual, board member about what their findings are and their recommendation or probability that a violation existed, and then they engage in nothing like heavy duty negotiation, but a discussion about what the stipulated order would be. And many times the remedy isn't a financial penalty or anything other than a letter of education, which it's still a public record and you don't want to be on that list, but all told, with the aim being toward education, I would agree with that as the push. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna pause the recording and people don't have to watch us. Dinner.
Break for dinner.
Thanks, Elliot, again for coming.
Thanks for noticing.
It was very informative. Thanks.
It's right there.
Yeah, they do. We used to have. The owl didn't work well for us, so we. We had. Yes, well, and I think it didn't work for us because we don't have like IT staff at our meetings, so it comes from our superintendent is our IT staff at our meetings, and that's not his thing. Yeah. But-
Okay, not to cut you off, so we're gonna reconvene at 18:01, and I'll pass it off to Dan.
All right.
Dan's not used to me being boss.
Well, so for the second half of the retreat today is to develop the board superintendent operating agreement. And so I asked a longtime friend, Phil Logger. Phil and I grew up in Scappoose. And so he's a few years younger than me. Yeah. And he has been on the school board at Scappoose for 16 years, currently the board chair. Have you been on, were you the board chair? Is different?
Seconds.
Actually.
Yes, yeah. Shorts are out twice.
So I just thought it would be helpful, you know, that my goal is that we would walk away with agreements on how, you know, half of the document is how the board's going to roles, responsibilities and operate, make decisions. So I won't necessarily weigh into that realm, but I thought it was really important, and the communication piece. But the backside of the page were board expectations of the superintendent's expectations of the board are really important to me, that we have real good clarity on those areas. And so I've told them, Phil, that you've experienced highly functional boards, not so functional boards, great superintendents, not great superintendents, so you've got the gamut of experiences. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, and then you and I have not necessarily rehearsed on how we're going to
So.
end up with this
There's a lot
product.
of trust in me tonight.
Yeah. So I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so real quick, I'd like to know each one of you guys is, your name, how long you've been on the board and why you started. What's your passion about serving on a public school board?
Well, my name is Robert Rodriguez. I've been here, I think since June or May. I'm new, way,
Yeah, so just first term.
yeah, yeah, all for this guy right here.
Okay. You do the other?
No.
Okay.
How tired of it?
But you're just in it for a Dan?
Yeah, we're just here for Dan, I did it,
Is that your passion?
yeah, Dan, I've shaved my head just like I do. Yeah, he's a trendsetter from day one.
I don't think Dan has to shave his head.
I'm Jenny, I was appointed to the board in December, and gosh, I'm here probably for the same reason as anybody is, to help direct policy and be part of something bigger. Kelsey Newberg, and I've been on a year, and same, just have a voice and for the kids and
I'm way down here. It's kind of hard to see anybody here. Heidi Troy, and I've been on the board. 16, 17 years with that. Yeah.
Bro, come on. What's the most important thing?
Most important thing?
Yeah.
It's our students.
No, I know, but what did you serve?
That's not a lifetime.
It is important.
It's important.
I'm retired Air Force.
Oh, that's cool.
Pretty amazing.
Are you the board secretary, I assume?
Yeah,
What was your name?
I'm Diane Lodge,
Diane.
board secretary, 28th year. My two daughters went K through 12 here, and I have a granddaughter in 5th grade here. So, how did I get started? Well, I'll be honest. I worked in corporate at Payless there in Wilsonville. We got bought out by Rocky. We all had to leave, and so I thought it was the greatest opportunity in my life to finally get to spend some time with the girls. And at that time, they were in 2nd and 3rd grade, I think. And go on field trips, so, cause you can't, I couldn't do that. And, the job came open and it was way less money than I was used to making, but I knew the payoffs were gonna be for my kids. Totally paid off.
Was it this position? Really?
Man, I'll start with your job and pay less.
Yeah.
It's like a sign.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, and I have some great kids and I'm proud of it. So it's a great district.
I'm Merle Stutzman. I've been on the board for 1 year. And I think my central or overriding interest is improving educational achievement, basic educational achievement. Worked in the community for 45 years. I'm presently retired. So I could echo Diane in saying the pay is way less. There are other benefits.
Glenn Holland, I've been on the board for 7 years. I'm a North Marion alumni. Lived on the same piece of property for my entire life. Have 4 kids. They all attended here. That's sort of what got me started, that and went to recruit me. But you know. Yeah, I'm not served as chair during COVID, 4 years.
I mean, that's right?
You technically couldn't pass the baton because you weren't allowed to. Social distancing.
Crystal Ross-Facil, I'm the current board chair. And I started because of the children and our aging facilities, and I wanted to see the bond pass. So I helped with organizing and running the pack. 6, am I here behind you?
I think so.
Yeah.
Thank you. As I've been on the Scottsdale School Board, since George, W. Bush was president. And up today, anyhow, so I'm in my 16th year of service. This is my final year of service. I've had 6 kids go through our school district. I'm an alum of Scott Moose, which Dan is as well. Also, in full disclosure, her husband Leon is my wife's boss at PGE. So we've known each other for a number of years.
They're coworkers.
They're
He would not want to say it.
That's true. He's like the boss you'd want to have, honestly, from what my wife would say. And I've known Dan, so we'll be just completely honest, I dated Dan's little sister. And
Yes.
Right, so did I. Right? So his dad was our PE teacher forever, and I think he retired soon after I left, probably.
Same year.
Yeah, same year we left. Anyhow, so I've known Dan, back in the day, he could have been my brother-in-law soon, but it didn't work out. But anyhow, I've dated his sister for 3 years and we've always been friends. You guys, I can tell you right now, one of them, and a little background on the school district that I'm from, I've literally had 6 superintendents in 16 years.
Well,
Yeah, it's a heck of a learning experience. Any of you that have lived through the pandemic and being on a school board is another experience that you don't want to ever experience again. I've been through 3 economic downturns, same with you, from the dot-com to the real estate bubble to just normal stuff. Right, just normal school funding, the ups and the downs. So there's a lot of things like you don't know what you don't know as a school board member until you've lived some of those things. And I always think I just had, last year, a board member, Jim Hogue, was on our school board. He was the 3rd longest serving school board member in the state of Oregon at 43 years.
Wow.
He gave me my diploma. His daughter graduated with his sister and myself in high school, and he was on the board since I was 7 years old when he came on the board. And he just stepped down I just texted him on the way here because it's his birthday today. Yeah, so there's a lot of history there, but my perspective, I think, comes with, like Dan said, alluded to, is I've had very high functioning boards. I've had very poor, I wouldn't even say low, just poor functioning boards. And then we've had kind of the mediocre. And I think when you have a high functioning board, I started with kind of the mediocre and we moved into a high functioning board. And a lot of that has to do with your superintendent. What does your superintendent require of you, expect of you? It's a two-way street. And so when Dan approached me to talk to you guys about a board operating procedure, a board and superintendent operating agreement is best to be done when everybody's getting along. So you have something to live by when things get tough. And things got tough when you served during the pandemic. We had all kinds of different voices coming from all kinds of different directions, a lot of them outside of your own district. And you get challenged. And those are the times that you want to have these guardrails in place. So it helps you guys as a team stick together. And that's kind of my theme, is you guys are a team. You are a team with your superintendent. I went through my first superintendent, when I first started on the board, the average tenure of a superintendent was 5 years. That surprised me. Like, I sat down with my superintendent at the time. He's now he's the ESD superintendent.
South Coast.
South Coast, out of Coos Bay. And he told me 5 years is our longevity. I'm like, really? Like, you know that already? And you're in year 3, like you're gonna be gone in 2 years? That's what I expect. It's now 3 years. And so a lot of that has to do with the political climate around public education and just all kinds of moving parts that make it very difficult to hire and keep a good qualified superintendent. So you guys have gone through the process. All of you have been here long enough that you hired Dan. You don't want to do this every 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Our current super, and you exactly as the board secretary and executive assistant to the soup, I assume. It's like that turnover is devastating. Not only to your staff and your students, your culture, your school district, your community as a whole. That turnover is not good. So you put in the work to hire a great person, and I am biased, but Dan has ultimate integrity. He wants to do the right thing for the students, for the community, and like, that's the foundation of everything you're looking for. Like, and you went through the search process, you've read the resumes, you look at you can read on paper, like, well, I would never hire this person, and then you get the 6 that float to the top, and you find out there's really only 3 people that I would hire, and none of them are great, maybe 1 or 2 stand out. It's tough. It's a hard job to fill.
I mean, yeah, I feel like you were there.
Again, I don't know your personal backgrounds, but I would assume none of you are professional hiring managers. So you're kind of looking at it through all, 7 different lenses of like, what's important. And then you also start bringing in your baggage of the last person you had. We don't want this, so it's hard. It's just a difficult thing to do. And then you have the lens of all of your staff looking at what you're hiring, at who you're hiring, and your community, students, everybody. It's tough. But if you find a good one, and Dan, I guarantee you is a good one, because I've seen some bad ones and I've interviewed a lot of them, literally dozens of people for superintendent positions, interim and both permanent. You have an excellent person here. So I would, if you don't hear anything else, work to build trust with your superintendent and work to create collaboration and take care of your superintendent. That's one of the things that the next longest serving board member on my board right now is she's in her 7th year. And so she's seen some of the things that I've seen, but everybody else is new to our 4 years or less, and 3 of them have been there for a year. And I'm trying in my last year is to pass on some of these things that are very important to the board in order to be high functioning and to retain the superintendent that we have, because he's absolutely phenomenal. So that's kind of what leads me into the discussion tonight and why these things are very important. So I know you guys have had a chance to look at them. I've got an item by item really quick. I can go through these. I don't know how much time I have, but I can touch on these items pretty quickly and give you my feedback. And then you can, if you agree or disagree, you guys are gonna do what you want with this information, but I can give you my perspective on what I've experienced in 16 years and why it's important. With that said, is there any questions? And I have PTSD from some bad board members, just so you know that. And I will not reference either one of their names tonight because it will trigger me. But I had some great ones like the one that texted tonight. Right? Yes, exactly. The first one, board roles and responsibility. Some of these are just a given. What I look at on our roles and responsibilities is we're at the 20,000 foot level. You are not in the operations of this school district. That is Dan's job. That is your principal's jobs. That is not anything, you have nothing to do with hiring and firing other than him. In fact, our school district, I was allowed to sit, when I first came on our school board, we were sitting in on principal interviews as school board members, athletic director interviews. Don't do that anymore. It's not a great practice because then you start bringing your personal opinions into what, if you have a good superintendent, that's the person that hires those people, and those people hire your classroom teachers, your EAs, all your classified staff. That's how it should work. When you don't have a good superintendent and you're second guessing your superintendent, you feel like maybe I know best who a good principal is. Granted, probably none of you have been in education other than Diane for any length of time. So to me, it's very important to stay out of operations business. It's not your, that's getting in the weeds and that's not in your purview. So I would leave, in my opinion, everything operational wise up to your superintendent. And also I feel strongly that honestly, that's probably the only interview you should be doing. I sat in on a business interview, a business manager interview. We had a really unique situation where some things might change quickly. And I felt like I wanted to be there to make sure we at least had a great business manager. And so I sat in on that and we were able to hire a great business manager, but normally I wouldn't even sit in on our business manager. And those two are pretty integral working together in our district office. So does that seem about normal or reasonable? Yep. To uphold the legal compliance. The confidentiality thing is an easy one. I put on here as my notes, loose lips, sink ships. You are liable for almost everything. So today, there's a lot of things my current board hasn't experienced. We've never even, they at their first tort claim, literally 1 meeting ago. I've got that's the next longest serving board member has never even faced a tort claim. Like when I came on the board, we had 5 going at one time. And I thought that was weird. And I'm like, oh no, you quickly become, oh, this is normal. You're always being sued. You're a school district, you're a public entity. We haven't had with our new superintendent 1 tort claim in 6 years. That tells you something about his management style. He puts out fires and he does it effectively. And that's what Dan's here for. Dan is to keep the people off the school district's back, but you have to help him do that. So you do not discuss anything related to staff. It's just, today we have not a non-renewal, actually terminating a teacher that's been in our district for 18 years. And I haven't seen that in 16 years, ever. I've never seen it. And so we're actually terminating the teacher and giving them the opportunity to resign. And so it's public information now because it's been posted, but that's something where you talk about it behind the scenes. It doesn't get shared with spouses. It doesn't get shared with your buddies. You don't talk amongst each other, texting and that sort of thing. That confidentiality, if you break that confidentiality, I know the teacher. I was hoping he would not text me this evening, frankly, because I think he knew it's coming, but he would reach out to me and I just can't answer. I don't answer, I don't even respond. But those kind of confidentiality things can put you in very serious hot water. We actually had 2 of our board members go to the district attorney and try to have all of our texts subpoenaed. So it's very serious. And I've lived through that. And I'm thinking, what did I text? You quickly change your procedures when you realize the severity of what can happen. So if you guys are texting board stuff amongst each other, just assume it's going to be on the front page of whatever the local newspaper is, and that everybody's going to see it. It's a horrible practice, especially if you're joking about either a fellow board member, a community member, a staff member. It's just like, if you want to joke about it, you better do it in person and you better not be in earshot of anybody else. That's just my advice. So those are some things that confidentiality is paramount, especially executive sessions. There's a reason that, and we don't have, do you guys really have anybody that shows up from the media? We used to, but we don't anymore. Yeah, ours quit like pre-pandemic. We don't even have a news, like the Spotlight newspaper we're at. I don't even know if they have a reporter. So we don't have ever, I read the blurb ahead of it, but no one's there. But executive sessions are, there's a reason they're that way. It's for, you know, student expulsion, staff matters, reviewing your superintendent, that kind of stuff. And that's what they're there for. You really, sometimes it's easy to get sideways on those discussions because it's one of the times you feel free to talk without everybody listening, but you really should stay on track and stay, you know, to the subject matter. It's pretty important because otherwise you find one weak link in here and they're gonna say, hey, we didn't do this, or we weren't doing that. It's just best to follow the rules, stay on the subject of the criteria that you're talking about. 3, recognize the role of the chair. So this is a different one. We do an annual, it's kind of like this, a retreat, but we do it a day, and it's in the summertime. And we've gone back and forth. We don't currently post our school board members' individual email addresses. We actually do one email address, and we are by far in the minority. And we keep talking about it. And I'm like, I'm good at it. I'll work at the pleasure of the board. As chair, I don't like to say, oh, we're gonna do this. But what we found is certain community members on all sides of different issues will try to pluck individual members off. And even though you guys are, you know, individually elected board members, you're still collective of a team trying to push forward to the same common mission and goals. And when people know that and they know you're pluckable, they know you're a conduit for the complaints, and it's usually newer board members are like, oh, I got a fresh ear. I'm gonna talk to him about Joe's, you know, doing a crappy job with girls' basketball, you know, we're gonna get him fired, whatever it is, you know, whatever example. You've probably seen 20 of them, 30 of them maybe. But you really want to try to make sure that you have one voice. So your board chair, however you guys have a like, you're the board chair. Yeah, so your board chair, you have to build trust with to answer typically in emails how you feel comfortable. And if you don't feel comfortable with how she's answering something, take her to the side and say, hey, and a lot of times it's just an explanation, but like I've got some new board members and one's like, I don't really think you captured, you know, how we should respond. And just like, oh, you know, when you're here 3 more, sorry, this is the old school board member coming out of it. When you're here 3 or 4 more years, you can answer the emails because I know what not to say and what to say to keep us out of trouble. And it doesn't feel it felt impersonal to them. I'm like, well, here's the thing, as soon as you create a dialogue and it's something that I'm literally pushing to the superintendent because it's something he needs to handle, I'm not creating that dialogue. I'm pushing this issue to the superintendent. And 9 out of 10 times, that's where it needs to go because we're not operations. We're not fixing the teacher issue. We're not fixing the coach issue. We're not fixing a busing issue. That is not what we're here. I said pay to do shit. I almost slipped and said pay. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Anyhow, that's his job, that's his role. And so we have an agreement, we have one board email, all that comes to our superintendent, our board secretary, and every board member, we all see it. And then if it's something that's directed specifically to the board or the board chair, I answer and I send it out to everybody, reply all. If it's not, I send a reply and say, hey, this is something that our superintendent needs to look at. I'm gonna forward this to him and still reply all. That way you don't have the individual board members. What I find that the problem is if they reach out to you, Jenny, and they say, you know, I've had this problem, no one else sees that, then it comes up and now it becomes a discussion item. The problem is now you're the only one that has the information. No one else even knows what's going on. And to me, that's not fair to the rest of the board. So if you have a working agreement that says, Jenny, if you get an email that has a complaint or anything that you are gonna forward to the superintendent, you guys need to work on an arrangement where it goes to everybody. Everybody should have purview to the same information, because if it comes to a meeting, you have to make a decision. It's only fair that all the other board members have seen what you see and have had time to reflect on it. Because oftentimes you come to a board meeting, you're supposed to make a decision that night, and it's like, Jenny's known about it for 2 weeks, but you haven't known about it for 15 minutes, you know, that's not fair. And so I think that's the best way to share information, soup always included, never try to solve problems in your silo. Yeah, I will say this 1,000 times, that is Dan's job. And I say big bucks, I swear I would not do this job. I'm not joking, and I don't make a ton of money. I would do this job for $500,000 would be close. And I'm not saying he's underpaid. You've been here long enough. It is an incredibly thankless job. And if he's lucky, his wife tells him when he gets home occasionally that he's doing a good job. So it's also that's also our job as board members, just to prop him up. You know, when you see him do something cool, just tell him.
Yeah, and it's hard sometimes when you're in the community or you're at a game or something and people, they only see one part of what's going on behind the scenes and you can't, so many times we really can't say, yeah, but you don't know about all these other stuff that's going on. And if you did, you'd understand why this decision was made or why this person is acting this way, you know? And it's frustrating, it's hard when, you know, because we can't talk about personnel issues or about people who are acting badly.
Yep.
It's not our job. And so, you know, that is kind of a hard thing to do. When somebody's like, they don't look like they're doing too good, but you know, behind the scenes, what else is going on, you're like, well, they're kind of doing as best they can, given a lot of circumstances.
100%, and you don't get to say anything. That's the privileges you lose when you become a school board member. And frankly, I felt like I lost social media, especially. I'm not a big social media poster anyhow, but it's like I don't like, comment, dislike, frown, anything on any posts. Because that's an agreement and that's a disagreement. That's either giving the thumbs up, I'm with you on this comment or issue, or I'm not. And it's just like, it's not a good look. It's like you're there to be serving all students, and when you get into social media, it's just like, it's such a rat's nest. It's just best to scroll on, either remove it or just keep moving. It's a race. It is totally, and I am not I think I'm at my best at about 8:30 in the morning after my second cup of coffee, and I think I could be a keyboard warrior, but even then, there's better out there. There's always a bigger bully, and like, I was like, I don't wanna win that race, that's not gonna happen.
I'm a proponent of just not being on any social media,
That's,
but
so our soup was, when we hired him, that was one of my questions, are you on social media? Because we were starting to get some negative feedback from some community groups, like private groups. And like, he goes, well, I don't, he goes, okay, I have a troll account. I'm like, all right, and I didn't know what that was at the time, but now I do. It's like, he's on there, he doesn't even have his face on it, but he's in, you know, gets a pulse of the
Yeah.
community. But yeah, it's a effective time sucking, wasted. It's on my phone. Anyhow, and I use it to market my company, so anyhow, so is there any feedback on that? I think the board chair is, you have to trust the board chair to make, and if you, like I said, if there's something if they're not articulate and some things you just let it slide. If it's not worth dying on the hill for, just let the board chair do her job. Just be thankful you don't have to do it, honestly, especially during like pandemic times, when it was like, I swear I was answering 4 or 5 emails a week. And just like, I have the same person, I don't want to ever see this person. It's just being recorded. Oh. All right,
Sorry.
that's fine. All right, I will duly noted. I learned from my own mistakes. Okay, so the 5 is, I think we're on 5.
Mhm.
The board, yeah,
Four.
for establishing goals, you guys should be doing that. Honestly, and your goals should align with your superintendent goals, and they should be tied directly to your strategic plan. Your strategic plan is your roadmap. I didn't have them for the first 8 years around my school board. We just put one together 8 years ago, and we just revised it, updated it, because it's a moving, living document. And the strategic plan does 2 things. That holds your district accountable. It also holds your superintendent accountable, but it also holds you as a board accountable. You literally have, this is what's important to us, this is how we're gonna measure it, and this is what we're gonna do. A strategic plan does all of that, it's your roadmap. And so it's imperative that you guys keep your strategic plan updated, and then also make sure that you're revising your goals, your superintendent goals, and your board. Some people say they should be different. I'm like, if I have goals, and the only person we can direct is the superintendent, shouldn't their goals probably be aligned with our goals? And he's honestly the expert at this table. He can actually drive a lot of those goals. So you guys can put input like, hey, we want math, achievement and reading to go up in 3rd through 6th grade. You can divide those things up and then make that one of his goals, but it should still align with your strategic plan. It just, it makes it very black and white. And then what's nice about this is that holds Dan accountable. We had a superintendent, one of the 6, that we let go before we had a strategic plan, and I was the board chair at the time. And I vowed, like, I felt like he was just floundering, like he was taking direction from 7 different board members, community members, staff members. It's like, it wasn't, and I wasn't a big fan of his, but he didn't have a map. He didn't have anything to refer back to even defend himself in the way he was managing our district. And I said, that's not fair to him. You know, we need to put something in place. And I talked to OSBA, and OSBA says, develop a strategic plan. And that's what we did. I think we have a map. We now have something that the superintendent knows he's working towards, and same with the board. And you guys have those goals aligned, and that's how you move forward and keep each other accountable. So it's a super important thing. By board will act as ambassadors of schools. That's the best part of being a school board member. You get to go talk about all the great things that's happening in the school district. You don't get to talk about, you know, so-and-so does a horrible job at cleaning up the cafeteria when he's on his shift or whatever, you know. You're there, you're literally a cheerleader. You're a cheerleader for your community. You're a cheerleader for your school district. You're a cheerleader for your staff members. And we all know, you know, public education is no different than the private sector. We've got high flyers, and we got mid flyers, and we got low flyers. It's not, you know, specific to public education. That's everywhere. Any workplace you've ever been, you can pick out the guy that's like, gosh, I wish she was pulling his weight, or she was doing what she was supposed to do. It's everywhere. It's not public education, so you shouldn't expect anything different with school districts. So it's just, that's how it is, but it's our job as school board members, in my perspective, is to promote it. That's why we're here. We want the kids don't care about any of this stuff. Kids don't care about these meetings. They don't care about, most of them will never even know who the superintendent is. If you have a dozen kids that know who Dan is, you're probably in the schools. Well, they might know you because you have a unique hair. But, you know, it's like a lot of these kids don't even understand what district office staff is. They don't even know what school board, but my own kids don't even know what I do. And I've been doing it for 16 years. They really don't know. And so like this kind of stuff really doesn't matter in the classroom. So what matters is, you know, that you're promoting the positive things that are happening. This, like I drive up here, this is a freaking cool building. I don't care if it's an addition or a renovation, it looks nice. People feel good about that, like share that with the community, invite your community in. I saw your parking lot's full, I'm thinking, I forget school's back because I have a senior and she's does her own thing, drives her own, you know, does everything, so I don't have to be at the school all the time, but I drive up and like your parking lot's full, like what's going on? Like, oh, it's a soccer game. Like that's your community celebrating what you guys do. Like you're providing the facilities for these people to have all this fun and entertainment. It's like promote those things, celebrate those things. And I think you are in an awesome position as a school board member to do that and tell people about it all the time. Tell them about all the great things. They'll hear all the negative things in the news, on the radio, on Facebook, blah, blah, blah. Just, they hear it from you, it means something. So that to me is really always talk about. So. Any questions so far? I'm trying to talk super fast. You're talking too fast? I don't want you to fall asleep on.
No, I love it.
No.
Okay,
I mean, me personally.
yeah. Is it too fast?
No.
Okay, good. All right. All right, so that's, you guys are the cheerleaders. Anyone else honestly goes for staff. So as new board members, you might have been told this, but staff, it's just, it's a weird dichotomy now, or it is, about how staff feel about board members. They think you're the boss. They act differently when you're there. Not all of them. Some are worse than they probably should be. I go to some summer parties with staff members, let's put it that way. But you want them to feel at ease. You don't want them you want them to feel like you're there watching. You're there participating. You know, you're not there like, I'm gonna see what you're doing, how you're teaching sex ed, blah, 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 whatever, you know, whatever it is. You're there to like celebrate them, encourage them and prop them up too. Cause I could not, that's another job I could not do as a school teacher. I would fail miserably. I think the first week I would fail, and that's the easiest week of the year, maybe. Well, that's when you're fresh and ready to go, and I just could not do that job. And I try not to tell school teachers that because then they hear that, oh, our job's horrible, blah, blah, blah. But truthfully, I could not do that job. It's almost.
It's not your calling.
Right, it's not my calling. And I know a lot of teachers that feel about one term in or one semester in that it's not their calling either, so. But cheerlead your staff members too, because they like to see that. It makes you feel more human to them. They see you as just, you know, one of them. You're not an elected official, you know, negotiating their contract. You're just a human that wants to see kids be successful, so that's important. Down to the next section where we operate and make decisions. this to me is for new board members. This could be a 6-hour seminar, so I'm just putting public board 101, like, you need to, you guys need to abide by standard meeting rules. One thing that we did do is we did a training on Robert's Rules of Order. It's actually very effective. It's great to learn those things ahead of when you have contentious board meetings, so you have control of the board meeting. This meeting is a business meeting of the board. This is not a public meeting for people to interact with you. You guys are literally just doing your business in front of the public. So that's important for people to realize that. And a lot of people, they'll show up to a contentious board meeting will be their first time they ever show up to a board meeting. I don't know what your attendance is like, but we had 8 people at our last board meeting. The only time you'll get a lot of people is that money's on the line, bus is on the line, or sports are on the line. One of those 3 things. That's when they'll be like,
COVID.
COVID. Well, we were online, so we didn't have anybody. There were a lot of them in the room and the Zoom room, but you didn't have to, they weren't yelling at you and, all that. So that was a little bit different, but yes, no, after COVID,
Oh, and union will show up.
we'll always have both classified and certified union representatives.
Negotiations.
Yeah, we
They
did a
don't have
little.
any board meetings.
Towards, I'd say, so we go every other year, we only have 2-year contracts, so we'll literally, we just literally finalized our contracts with the teachers. We're opening in January with our classified, so it's like we're always negotiating, it feels like. Classified is a very easy group in our district to deal with. Teachers have a lot more moving parts, and so it's always a little bit longer and a bit more contentious, but we have a good working relationship with our teachers. It has a lot to do with our superintendent, frankly. We do, before our board meeting as chair, we do a labor management meeting. We have both union leaderships. We have 4 of their people, 2 from the classified, 2 from the certified, meet with myself, the superintendent, and our HR director. And they drive the agenda because there's literally almost nothing that we ever ask for. They have the concerns. And we just had our first one on Monday at my board meeting for the year. And it was pretty light, but he is my superintendent, is working on those relationships all the time. Doing MOAs, making sure that things are working smoothly, keeping teachers and other staff, having reasonable expectations, no surprises, that kind of thing. But yeah, our board meetings are typically not well. We had one where we had that contentious OLOP book. George was one of our OLOP books, and it was a transgender related book, and we had a bunch of people, and a lot of them were not even from our school district, which kind of upset me. It's like, you don't have your own school district to complain about, you can taking up all 4 hours of meeting, which are usually an hour. Strike that from the record. Yeah. So public board 101 is yeah. You do your business at a board meeting, really is what it is. You don't talk about board stuff in any type of forums or anything outside of a public board meeting. It's just, you're gonna chat with your friends. I get texts from other board members. I chatted with a board member on my way here because we're doing this dismissal of this, and she'd never seen that. She's like, what do we do? I'm like, don't worry. It's like, no, just read the thing, we're fine. But I have those conversations as board chair, and you guys will talk amongst yourself. There's nothing to prevent you from doing that, but I warn you not to grow it out of much of that. Like, don't try to make decisions. Don't have an open mind. You should be board and be willing to listen. I think that's important. 7 support decisions of the majority. That's a really important one. So when we had 2 contentious board members, we have a 7-member board. So we always had, in our superintendent said, all I need is 4. That was probably part of his downfall, but he's like, all I need is 4 votes. I don't care what those 2 people say, because all I need is 4 of you to pass. That's not a great, you don't want to be in that position, but.
And you will never hear me say that.
Right, yeah, that's not.
I mean, because if I've seen that play out, and while, whether it's 5-2, 4-3, I will know that there are 3 people that would like to see me doing something different.
Yep.
And I will not be able to, that will be very difficult to function under if it's always going that 5-2, 4,
Yep.
4-3. So that would be something very important to me, and I also, not to pontificate too much, but I think there's also a great demonstration that our culture needs to see that I might be in the minority unless I have just this incredibly philosophical discussion. Being able to go with the majority to support the team is something I think our culture needs to see more of. to say that I see that I'm outvoted here. But, and here's why, but for the purposes of the team, I'm voting, whatever direction it's going. I think our culture needs to see more of that. So instead of off my podium there for a second, but I think it does make it hard to leave if it's constantly being split.
It does. It takes the confidence away initially to staff. Staff see that, and then that's a pry bar. Now you're a conduit. If you're in the 2 or the 3, you are now a conduit for all of that. They're gonna come and say you're the big one of the 2. They're gonna come to you all the time, and they're gonna try to pry you with a staff or it's, a certain community group or what have you. It's not, I say leave it at the vote. I mean, if you actually you have to vote in that minority. I wouldn't say not to. I would just say that's where it is. You don't have side discussions after the meeting. You don't have discussions on Facebook at your friend's party about why you're the 2. It's done. People know where you stand. You made your voice very apparent in the vote that you took in the discussion leading up to that vote. That's where it ends. We had board members that that's not where it ended. And the gavel got used. I'm like, I thought the gavel you just used it for the start and the end of the meeting. Oh, no. You actually use that gavel. So, but that's a big thing. So, also another thing, you don't want to grandstand. It goes back to the philosophy. This is about the kids. It's not about you and your personal opinion or your political ideologies or your social norms that your expectations are. It's literally about the kids. The kids 99% of the time don't really care about the adult BS that we talk about. They really don't. They just want to be at school, safe, fed, learning in a great environment. That's what they want. They don't care about all these other things. So I think it's important that as a board member, you're not grandstanding on ideals. You you give your testimony or your discussion, you're thoughtful, you're respectful of other board members, people in the audience, staff members. You say your piece and then you vote and you move on and it's done. And now you move forward with that. That is now the board's decision. You guys have made that now as a group. And I think that's very important. What you see in Congress is not normal. As a political science major, worked on a bunch of different campaigns. I'm missing the debate tonight as much as, I DVR'd it. So I'm a total policy and political science wonk. And so, but I also know that the things that are happening in our national level, even in our state legislature, I think we could all agree that's not what adults should be looking like and acting like. It's just not. And we don't need to have that filtered into our freaking school boards in a district with 1,600 students. There's no room for that. There's no need for it. We can be better than that. So lead by example. Don't grandstand. 8, for an item to be added to a meeting agenda, that's totally common. We have a rule, we actually have to have 2 board members propose it. So it's not just like a weird idea, and we've never really we've only added 2 or 3 items. And usually a board member will just approach me as the chair, like, hey, can we put this on the agenda? I'm like, well, technically we have a rule. And I think it's worthy. I'm not the gatekeeper of all agenda items, but I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let me talk to the superintendent. Yeah, let's put this on the agenda. A lot of times it's stuff that honestly can be solved. You don't need to have it on board meeting. Okay, how about you just talk to Dan? Dan will figure this out for you. We don't need to put it on the agenda. It not only takes time, but if it's controversial, it's to me, it's better to solve those out of the public view. It's a better practice. It's a better look for you as a school board. It's a better look for the district. And those things are important. Those optics, people are watching, and that's important. So is there any overwhelming feedback for me yet?
No, I just had a question, some of these things that are written out are in our policies. What's the benefit of stating it again in operating agreement?
So you're agreeing to it. Yeah. Well, you can go outside policy. Exactly, and you can go outside this agreement too. I think this is in my opinion, as a school board member, this is an opportunity for you guys to all sit at one table without any pressure, to look each other in the eyes and say, this is how we're gonna operate. Policies, I've yet to read all over policies. I had 16 years to do it. And they change constantly. And so some of these things might be specifically in your policy and some might be ours. This is a more than a handshake agreement. This is how we're gonna This is what we're gonna do, this is how we're gonna respond, this is how we're gonna behave.
There's a little bit more teeth into it.
Yeah, I think it does, and I think everybody sitting at the table, it's like, this is your time to say, yes, no, I don't like the feel of this, this isn't how I would do it, or, I have an issue with this, or, I like to try to put my past experiences behind. With other superintendents and other board members, and every day is a new day, and so I like to, give people the benefit of the doubt. And trust them until I'm not a big, like, you have to earn my trust, that's how my dad was, that's how my grandpa was, but something. How about I just, Jenny, I think you're a great person. And until you prove me wrong, I'm just gonna think you're a great person, and you'll have every opportunity to prove me wrong if you want to, right?
Yeah.
That's just my philosophy.
I think it's also a piece of your evaluation tool for yourselves and for your
Oh,
superintendent.
that's right, you guys do self-evaluations, we don't do self-evaluations, that's scary. No, we don't, I didn't notice you guys do self-evaluations, though, yeah, we don't do that. And we don't do like the 360 of our superintendent where everybody gets to evaluate, it's like, no, that's a horrible practice.
It might be something you do. If you think you're need to.
Like, there's the deal. That's a good example. So you either do it or you don't do it. You don't do it when you have to do it. You put it in your policy and you say, if it's good enough for Dan, it's good enough for Dan's evil twin, right? That's really where you should be at. Because if he's not, that's true, but that's also a responsibility as a board member. You've got to have the guts to stand up to, and I've done that personally. I was one of the reasons why my my first suit interim, my third suit left, me and one other board member, like this, it was just mayhem. It was just like a different fire every day for months and months and months and months and months, and it's just like, we're getting nowhere, we're not moving forward. And so, and it came to that, and it took a lot to get other board members on board, because they want to see the good in people, and you do. And he's a good person, he's a numbers head, moving in the direction. But yeah, anyhow, to that point.
I would just say, as a person who has voted no often, it's okay to vote no. And it's okay to, state why you vote no, and, but disagree and commit is important.
Yep.
And I've had to do that many times.
That comes down to a 7-member board that has 7 different perspectives.
Mhm.
And I'm not as big about. I'm not a proponent of telling people why.
Yeah.
To me, that has a real easy propensity to lean into grandstanding. Like you're making a point for a certain amount of people that are listening. And I don't think that's the best interest of students. Can you give your opinion on an issue without saying why you voted no? We actually had this very specific, and this person she'd take our discussion time, and it was all hers. It was all about why she didn't believe in this. It's like, we get it. We've heard this 30 times. We understand your vote, honestly, it speaks for itself. You are opposing whatever is being put up to a vote. That speaks for itself. Really, you telling everybody why doesn't serve a purpose. That's the great thing about being an outsider.
Yeah.
And people, if people want to ask you after the meeting, they can ask it and you can tell them. And there's a likelihood that they probably already know. But you saying it and putting it in public record doesn't give it any more teeth. All it does is it starts building up resentment from other people. And that's just my personal opinion. It's what I've experienced.
That's a good perspective, though.
Yeah, it's bringing a little PTSD. I enjoy doing this because I don't have that personal connection. I'm not,
Yeah.
your face is not turning into that other person's face. Yeah. I think people, like, they get it. Your other board members know. They know why you voted no. People that follow you or are friends with you, they know why you voted no.
Well, I will just say, like, the one time that I really voted no was when we had decided on a 1-year contract for the interim and it switched to 2 and it was like a last minute deal.
Yep.
And I was like, no, that's not what we were supposed to have, and it felt like a behind the scenes kind of thing,
Yeah.
and so I just said, it's not because I don't trust him and I don't think he's doing a fantastic job. is because I feel like it's more of a bait and switch thing.
Yeah, and I would say all that except for the bait and switch thing.
Well, yeah, I didn't say.
Yeah,
that,
no, you know what I'm saying, I
but-
just, there's ways, they knew
Yeah.
why. I mean, you explaining it to the public, it doesn't change anything, it really.
No, but it does put it in a public record if people want to really.
It does, but what is that? What-
No,
Well, no, it does really help me sometimes,
Okay,
especially on
We'll
video.
agree
So
with
we'll
this.
agree at the.
no, no, totally, and I,
Disagree and,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's true.
we're gonna start to read that right now. I- The naysayers would say, well, that's, that's healthy to have that disagreement. It totally is. Your
Yeah.
vote is your disagreement. Your reasoning behind, if you keep it simple and it's not
Mhm.
offensive to other people, like, when you say it's a bait and switch, that's implicating someone. If you were to say that. And
No, I
you did, I know, but you don't want to implicate people. Now it looks like, hey, we're dysfunctional, like what? Can we not figure this out? Can we not get, that was whoever put that process together, they failed. Not the board, but whoever put that process where it was, I felt like a bait and switch, that, and Dan's the guy that keeps you guys from getting 5-2 votes. He's the guy that keeps you on a 7-0 vote, and it's not a rubber stamp board when 7 people agree. Because 7 people have experience, 7 people are educated, 7 people, have, opinions. So when you come to a 7-0 vote, anybody that says, oh, it's a rubber stamp board, that's BS. That's just BS. I'm sorry. You got high functioning people that can make a decision. There's nothing wrong with that. And we're ironing out our differences. And how you come to that eventual vote might look differently than how it was initially proposed. And that's how compromise works. I have to do it every night at home. I have to get up with our new puppy every other morning. That's compromise.
Now you're making me reconsider my puppy fee.
Yeah, the problem with me is I have a memory loss and, I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember every single facet of that decision. However, I think what is important about that whole thing, when things like that happen, when decisions, like things are changed behind the scenes, especially when we're not part of board leadership, and it's happening
Yeah.
among board leadership. Is just having the chair communicate and let board members know what's going on. Because sometimes I feel like some people are getting information and some people aren't.
Yeah.
On board, and that's a horrible feeling.
It is.
And I have showed up to board meetings where I'll hear things, it's like, this is the first, I'm in a board meeting now in public, and this is the first I've heard of it, and it's clear that other people know about what's going on with this. And doesn't feel good.
No,
And so and I'm sure I've been in board leadership and I'm sure I've done that to other people, and it's not intentionally, but I'm sure it's happened. So I guess what I'm saying is, as long as we have a lot of communication going on, and Crystal, something's happening and she's letting each of us know where they're in a group mail that we don't respond to or whatever, but so let's say board member A has a question about something that happened in a presentation and they want more information about it. So Dan goes to whoever was presenting and says, could you please give us more background on this issue? So it gets sent, and then it gets sent to board member A, but really, that information should get sent, even though we didn't ask the question,
Yep.
it should get sent to
Yeah.
everybody, because then you're giving them more information to make a decision on that we don't have access to.
yep, exactly.
And I think that, that's areas where we can always work on.
And Dan's hearing this. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
So Dan shares that information. And our supervisor, new 6 years now, he does an excellent job at sharing everything. And he's very black and white. And I know Dan is very black and white. He will tell you where he stands. You may not like it. And that's how our soup right now is, and I love it. Because I know where you stand. I don't have to guess. And that guessing is what starts the conversations. It's like, if you don't know where Dan stands, people ask the questions, I say, I can pretty much tell you Dan's gonna answer this way, and that's important, that trust that you build, and he's new, but you'll build that trust with Dan.
So far,
That's super cool. Yeah, right?
Well, some of the topics in the weekly emails are a question I got from somebody. I don't necessarily say that, Jenny had this question, this is Jenny's question.
Yeah.
But sometimes something will get posed by a board member, and so I'll just make a note of that to say that needs to go out in the communication. And so some of the topics that are on there are because a board member asked me something.
And I think that is what creates clicks in a board, or creates you know, division or mistrust, because it's like, I don't feel like I'm a part of things because I'm not hearing about things, or I'm purposely, you know, maybe you feel like you're purposely being excluded. I'm not saying this, I'm just saying you could feel these ways if we don't have effective communication.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that too, because I have it, a board member that, feels that way often. She's been on the board for 2 years now. And she, like, I knew about our dismissal last night, and she was like upset that she didn't know about it till today. I'm like, well, there's, I don't feel like I'm the keeper of you before you, like, I honestly laid away, because I know the guy that's being dismissed, and I thought about it, and I worried about it last night, and I worried about it today, and it finally came out. But there's certain things that the board chair, not a lot, but certain things they might know a day ahead, or some things that are going on, or like
Yeah.
he should poll you on certain things, he's just gonna go to the leadership, and you as the leader need to communicate with these people, keep everybody in the loop, that's on you to do that. And I do that, and I do it religiously, and I'll even do group texts, and I'll even say, don't respond to me as a group. This is simple, we're doing an admin dinner at my house on the 27th, and I'm like, I did a group text, are these 3 dates? Okay, respond to me individually, so we don't, it's nothing about board business, and it'd be completely legit, but it's a good practice. And then they all got back to me, and, you know, I do that kind of stuff all the time, but I communicate with them all the time. And I actually encourage them to say nice things to our soup and check in on him. But yeah, that's on you. That's part of you being a leader in the district. As a leader on this school board, is you need to make sure you're including everybody in your communications. Everybody has access to the same information. It's pretty important. And it creates division quickly if you don't.
I know I'm gonna talk a lot here, but
No, you're
it's not from experience. And I have no problem actually with trusting our chair, and I
Yeah.
do trust our chair. So I don't need to be told about something right away.
Yeah.
I don't need to know everything. I just need to know that as a part of a 7-member board, we're all gonna be treated equally. That's all. And I trust that. And this is just part of the retreat things that
Exactly. No, I love that.
No,
It makes me feel better.
Yeah, no, and prior, I've had feelings like Heidi, but I don't think it was ever like intentional. I think Dan's communication style fits our board desire a lot better than what we had previously.
Yeah.
Like, it's clear, it's concise, it's consistent, which is like wonderful. Yeah, I mean, 90% of our problems prior, I felt was like a communication breakdown.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and COVID, like, nobody wanted to say anything ever,
Yeah.
so, yeah, it was like constant scrutiny. So, I will say, like, even though a lot of those things that we discussed previous that we agree to disagree on, I think a lot of it has stemmed from lack of communication, and Dan is like knocking it out a little hard on that.
Yeah.
Like,
He's a good communicator.
yeah,
Right. Yes. All right, anything else on that one? Okay,
9.
8, no, oh yeah, 9, perfect. 9, if a board member needs more information about an agenda item, this is great, we practice this and I preach it all the time, is if you have an issue with something on the agenda, talk to the board, talk to your superintendent. I didn't even, people ask me, and I was like, gosh, I wish, like tonight, I had a call from a board member, like, I knew that's something she could have talked to the superintendent about. She doesn't want to bother the superintendent because he's busy, when I have his job. But if you get your board packet, read it, be responsible. I have a board member. Is this audio recorded too?
Yeah.
Both.
We're.
Okay, no one knows I'm right now. Anyhow, a board member, that we're making a very important decision, and I hear the packet top rip open, like it hadn't been opened. And we were making a very important decision on a personnel matter that night, and that bugged me for the rest of the meeting. And he didn't say anything, didn't give any input. It was actually for an evaluation. That's an important one. Like, that's your one time a year that you guys all get together and decide, is Dan doing his job? And he ripped his board packet open at our meeting. And I'm just like, if you say one thing about anything. I'm just gonna be like, you are kidding me, and I love him, he's a good friend, but I'm like, that, he should have asked you, get your board packet, take the time to read it. I don't expect you to read every single policy and every freaking mark out and all these different things. If you want to do that, so I do because I'm a dork, but if you at least read the packet, understand it, so you're not sitting in a meeting looking at it like, whoa, and you have this dumb question or question that puts Dan in a weird situation or makes the rest of the board, just makes you look like a fool, frankly. Read your packet, get your questions to your superintendent. If you think your board chair is a better avenue for that type of question, use your board chair. And a lot of times, if you send it to the superintendent, it'll be something, he'll be able to answer, and then you don't have to ask a dumb question or a revealing question, or there's things you do as a board that are not scrupulous, but you're doing it like, kind of like you alluded to earlier. You can't give all the information, and things are happening because you have privacy concerns. You've got literally, you can't talk about staff members, and things evolve, even though it's not 100% done in a public meeting. These guys don't have to do public meetings. They're doing stuff behind the scenes, running your district, and so they don't have to abide by that public meeting what we do as board members. And so as they're doing work, it might not be 100% apparent, but a question you ask could put your superintendent and board at risk of looking at, A, like you don't know what you're doing, or B, like putting a decision that needs to be made at jeopardy. And so it's read your board packet, get all your questions answered. You can still have a discussion before a vote. It doesn't keep you from having a discussion, but knowing the answers and not surprising your superintendent with an answer out of left field that jeopardizes them is very important. That's one of the main differences between a high functioning board and anything below that. Is and that's part of your communication. You're communicating with your superintendent. And a lot of those things are, about 90% of them are solved by a phone call to Dan. And honestly, if Dan's astute to it, he's like, God, maybe other people have the same thing. He sends an email out and says, hey, this was on, just wanted to give you guys a heads up. And he'll get really good at doing that ahead of himself. Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of reading your packet, not the morning of, not even the night before. Give yourself time to digest it, and then ask questions. And a lot of summer meetings, there's not a lot to digest, July, August meetings, there's not a lot going on, so nothing controversial, adoptions or anything weird, but yeah, read your packet, ask your questions ahead of the board meeting. And a lot of people are like, well, then it looks like we're just overstamping. No, you're prepared. That's what you do when you're prepared. You go to a business meeting when you're in a Fortune 500 company and you have 5,000 questions. No, you're supposed to have that report dialed in and you give it and people take notes and they walk away. That's high functioning. That's okay. Your questions are answered before you got there. There's nothing wrong with that. But the discussion can still be had and you be prepared. Strive to start meetings on time. This is an easy one. Be prepared, keep the sessions to facts and data and steer away. Typically our meetings last less than an hour. I've been in meetings that have lasted 3 hours. It's usually it comes back to almost like people grandstanding, or some people I feel like don't have any better things to do, have nowhere to be. I don't know what the other reasons are, but yeah. Isn't that bad? Can you tell I'm in my 16th year? And I'm not 1 foot out. I love doing what I'm doing, but it's, yeah. It's like, board meetings do not have to last hours. I hear about, Portland Public Schools maybe, but even then, it's like, you just have a larger scope of the same thing. Like, why are you taking 3 hours to do a board meeting? Your board meetings should last an hour or less. And I read your last 5 agendas. None of those things should last more than 5 hours, or more than an hour. They're similar to ours. Your district, we've got 2,200 students. You have a little over 1,600 students. We're similar in size. Your demographics are way more diverse than our demographics are. But so you deal with probably some different things that we deal with, but for the most part, we're very similar. And we're a rural school district, so a lot of the same things going on. So you should have all of the same situations.
So I'm just gonna real quick check on time, so we're about halfway. So it ends at 8, and so I know I said at the beginning that it'd be great if this was done, but I'm not married to that idea. This is our agreement, and there's been a lot to take in. So if we just kind of get to a place where, hey, we're gonna revisit this at the next meeting or something like that, we'll just see where we're at for time. But so I don't know if there's feedback for Phil or how we're doing for time.
I'm not halfway through, like I'm right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you're good. Yeah.
Okay.
He's
Okay.
got them through this.
So how we communicate, the board chair responds to your emails into the board. I think we already talked about that, didn't we? Yeah, so I don't know what your guys' protocol is. As the board chair, you guys have individual board emails, right? So what do you guys do? What's your operating procedure on how that works?
Email responses from the board chair. That's how it's been. And usually we have like legal if we need it.
Exactly, yep,
And so that's why we keep a real tight handle on that.
yep, that's perfect, that's awesome. Anything I have that's questionable, we have, Brian Hungerford Law Firm, and I'll send it to Brian. He's on my cell phone, I'll text him, okay, got a question. Can you answer me in the next 4 hours, please?
Yeah.
And I'll run it by him and the superintendent. But yeah, totally, that's great practice. So that's money well spent. So yeah, so yours is, any of these emails come in, they come to you as well, everybody CC, you respond, you're the only one that responds.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's perfect, that's a good practice, honestly. Yeah. It's easy,
Oftentimes, I was gonna say, oftentimes it's operation stuff. A lot of times
Yeah.
it's actually, I get a lot of redirects back to the suit because
Yeah.
it really wasn't stuff that the board shouldn't be,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be weighing in on. It's not in our, it's out of our
Right.
league,
Yeah.
so, and you're probably finding that too, I think.
and that's where my.
Oh, you got Benny knowing me.
So I put
Okay.
all staff or student issues are referred to the Zoom. Your connection is with the student, not the staff members within the buildings. Your connection with staff members are as if you're a parent, you have, and you put your parent hat on, and it's a teacher and you walk softly. And then, and when you're in the buildings, just chatting with people, and you're a cheerleader, you're not a watcher, you're not coming into the classroom observing, that's not your job, you know, so. Number 12, be mindful that you represent the board in public. So this, I put your team, you and the soup, treat one another with respect as a team, as all of you as a soup included in that. Don't undermine anyone's staff member, soup or other board member. So it's just like, at the end of the day, you guys have to meet in the same room, you have to spend lots of hours together for many years. It's best that you guys learn to work together, and that team, the larger team is your district, your staff included, but your team is the superintendent and the school board. And then honestly, I include my, our executive assistant Julie, because she's awesome, and she cooks us dinner every board meeting, and I love her. She does selectively, I heard that. No, she is part of our team. She sits in, she takes notes in our executive sessions. She knows stuff that only board members, even the soup doesn't know, because she's taking notes for the soup evaluation. So it's like, I consider her part of our team. So we take very good care of our executive assistant and our board secretary. Number 13, this is adulting 101. Work out your differences as adults. If differences escalate, include the board chair of the soup. So the thing was like, if you had a problem with another board member, if you can't be adults and work it out, like I don't like you or you did something, it's probably not a good example because you're the chair. You two were working together. Well, the vice chair, anyhow. Yeah, work it out, be adults. And then if it doesn't, if it escalates, then bring the soup in and the board chair and like, hey, we're having some issues, just talk. So that's an adulting answer on that, or my input on that. 14, communicate directly with the superintendent when information is needed. Mine is do not attempt to solve problems for staff or the community, not the job. You will stay out of so much trouble and you will quickly become the non-conduit to those squeaky wheels. And it is very new, it's usually the new board members that like, hey, you know, yeah, he's gonna let it, you're gonna listen, aren't you? And you're gonna change it, you're gonna fix it tomorrow, right? Hey, by the way, Dan, we need to fire our athletic director at the high school, because I told him we would, yeah. That ain't gonna fly. But do not attempt. Meddling is the worst. I'll say to you, that's why he gets paid. That's what he chose this line of work. That's your defense. You chose this line. Yes, you agreed to your contract and the compensation, so that's his job. Let him do those things, and it'll just clear the way for a way smoother operation, like, and I can guarantee, I'm not an expert in anything in that school district, in any one of those buildings, well, a couple of things, but not anything that I would claim any expertise to. So it's best to leave him up to that and build those relationships, so do not, you bring in the paid help, AKA the student for that. so that's an easy one. Direct public complaints to the district complaint process. One of these, so, what is it here, K something? KL should know that one. Yeah, that's getting back in my brain and it's been seared in there too. So we had a lot of times where we were drafting people to KL where it really, there's a lot of things that if you're communicating properly and you're managing well, things are getting solved before KL. KL is like, but if they're demanding change or they're demanding action and they're not getting what they want, you send them that way. It just feels impersonal, especially in a small community when you say, complaining about whatever situation. Ultimately, if they're not getting action from the superintendent, or they're getting action, they're not here, they're not getting what they want. Exactly. KL is perfectly normal, and I would submit that they use that process, because that's last case scenario. Honestly, if you're doing a good job of referring stuff, Dan's keeping a good pulse of the district, and he knows the fires are coming when they're coming. That's not gonna happen. We haven't had these KL issues, honestly, since the pandemic. And we had one after another, after another, after another. Just everybody wanted to complain about everything. And it was just like, I should have quit back then.
And I would just understand, some people will use the word complaint when they really mean concern.
Exactly.
And so I would not read, if you see complaint in their email, just assume that it's a KL. Just go ahead and substitute in your own head that that's a concern.
Yeah.
And just direct their concerns, because I've tried to steer people away from KL. Because it can feel really impersonal and not very productive,
Yeah.
unless you get those people where I'm gonna need this in writing so it doesn't change, and then direct them to KL.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a last resort, honestly. And then for me, it's much the impersonal part, because there are people that know you that kind of was a concern. And you're just like, oh, go to KL, that's KL. Well, that's our form, go fill it out, it just doesn't feel right, and it's something that Dan can smooth over, work through, that kind of thing, that's important. You guys don't need to go like a 3-minute potty break? We good? Oh, yeah, no, go for it. Yeah, let's take like a 4-minute break.
Sure.
Okay,
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Start the clock now.
Yeah.
Expectations of the superintendent. So, work toward becoming a team with board members. I put on here, honestly, with, social mixers. This is a social mixer. Building tours, go on building tours with your superintendent, one-on-ones. You already, Jen, you alluded that you already had some one-on-ones with them. Those are good regular scheduled things, like every quarter, we had a suit that we did it every month. Now, it's just when you wanna go meet with the suit, I think we should probably get back to every quarter. It's just a good thing, especially get some board members that are honestly just shy and don't know, like, hey, I wanna develop a personal relationship with the superintendent. I want to know, and that's how that trust, starts working itself out. If you guys have committees, sit on committees. Negotiations is really, we had a transportation one, we used to have a food service one. We had like 4 or 5 committees. Now I think negotiations is, we have a great thing one that we have a board member sit on. But negotiations is really it. And always everybody wanted to be on negotiations because you're dealing with the money and strike. That's just another meeting. And the teachers want to go along. And so it's like.
Were those suit committees or were they standing?
All of those committees were standing committees.
Oh.
Yeah, all those. And so transportation, there's really there's no alternative.
Yeah.
So it's first student or Durham, and so there's really nothing to talk about. So
Yeah.
our business manager handles our transportation, and if there's something big going on, we hear about it. And then food service, it's almost the same now. There's no reason for a board member to be involved in food service. We know nothing about it. Yeah, no, a good price of a pint of milk is. Social mixers, get together, go to a football game, so we're doing something really cool. So our rival when we were in high school in Scappoose is St. Helens. And we have what's equivalent to this Civil War. It's the 7-mile war. We're 7 miles apart. Every year I've been board chair, I get our board members, our superintendents on both, and our high school principals and middle school if they want to participate too, but our high school principals and athletic director, we have 2 principal, vice principal, and athletic director of high school, and we all compete. And we do some sort of halftime competition. It lasts for about 10 minutes, but it's totally fun. I only last weeks. And I know they have a 5-member board, and I know all 5 of them. I went out to dinner with 3 of them at that conference in Salem here recently, and their superintendent. Scott Stockwell, he's a former St. Helens guy, so like we can give him a bad time, but those kind of things are fun to do, because it's like you build those relationships amongst yourselves, so that's just an example, we're doing it all. No, we're not talking about board business. We're having our mixer, we're hosting it at our house on the 27th of this month, I think it's Friday night. Yeah, because there's no school that Friday. And we're having all of our board members there, our superintendent, our building principals at all the buildings, and our district office executive team, so our HR, our business manager, our communications director, and our executive secretary. And you're not talking about board business, and honestly, the only downside is maybe the lens of how it all together on half here. I really don't care. So we're not talking about board stuff, you're gonna talk about a little school district stuff, because that's what everybody has in common now when you're in that same room. But you're not talking about board business, so you're fine. Now, if you guys all huddled in the back room of a local restaurant and peeked over the, window every once in a while, that might be a little suspicious. But no, you're okay.
I was a little surprised that Elliot didn't use that as a carve out, because it is carved out as for social functions, as a carve out of the public meeting rooms.
Yeah.
So, but board members and the board superintendent team just have to hold each other accountable for not, talking
Yeah.
business.
Yeah, it's more the lens. We used to have our summer retreats at a board member's house. Well, that's an open public meeting, and how many community members would feel comfortable driving up there? Half-mile drive of Will Kessie's house to go to a board meeting, they wouldn't, so we're like, this probably looks better if we hold it at a public location, so we did it at the fire department one year, we have only like a PCC building, we've done it there for the last 4 or 5 years, it's just better lens. It was more comfortable at Will's house, because it's like, it was just nicer.
Yeah.
We're in an office otherwise, but, yeah, so it's more the lens, but I wouldn't worry about that. You guys are just getting together as people, and, we do it as a kickoff. So everybody's so busy leading up to summer ending, staff especially, and people, normal people that have vacations. And those first couple weeks are busy, so we try to plan it a couple weeks into September when the weather's still good. And then we get everybody together, and I give a little, 2-minute talk, and, welcome everybody back, and tell them, they're gonna do a great job, and just get to see them at a more unschool level personality. It's great, it honestly feels good too, and you know them all. So, and most all of them live in our communities. So respect and acknowledge the board's rule on setting policy. That's an easy one. Stay in your lane and don't get involved in operation. That's a no-brainer. Are you the meddler? Are you the one that gets involved in? Yeah. Oh, no, I can't do the smile like.
He's not a meddler.
Anything,
I'm like, not our business.
but I love that, okay. Good idea, well, we gotta I don't want another thing to handle. No. Managing my own company. Anyhow, so yeah, stay in your lane, and Merle, I have not heard from you. Is this all kosher with you?
Are you okay?
That's
You don't
why-
have any questions or
okay.
feedback?
Well, I made some notes, but as superintendent said, we'll go over those.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. Yeah. So work with the board, this is an expectation of the superintendent, is to work with the board for a clear vision. This is what I would do in your annual retreat. This is the work that you should have, now that you're all new board members, you're all on board, you're getting your feet wet. You don't know what you don't know, your first 6 months, a year, 5 years, honestly, you're always learning things, but that first year is just getting your feet under you. That second year, especially with the new board, you should be working on strategic plan stuff, you should be working on initiatives that your soup has identified as needs in your district, and his staff has identified as needs. Like you should be working on those on your annual retreat, like those are important, that's where he's gonna get his work done. Is being able to push those initiatives, and those will be your guys' interest, but knowing he's the expert, he knows what the needs are. So that's important, that at your annual retreat should be, planned around your strategic plan or things related to that. Timely inform the board of all critical information. So you as a board, this is a kind of a sticky one. You need to determine with your soup what level of information this is and what is timely. Like, you guys need to have a general agreement, okay? Buses are, we have all kinds of, that's usually transportation related, but we have buses that were coming back from a field trip that got stuck behind a crash and, they were 2 hours late, so it messed up everybody's schedule. So the board members are upset. Well, first of all, none of your students were upset or affected by it. But they were upset that they didn't know as a board. I'm like, that's an operations thing. You can't change it. I can't change it as a board member. I'm not communicating that out on social media. That's an operation thing. He's dealing with it. So you guys need to determine what's very important and at what level that importance is and when he should communicate with you. That's you guys, and so he has clear direction and clear understanding expectations of what is your level of importance, and each one of you probably has a different level or a different level of needing to know. That's important. He knows that, and you guys have that general consensus. Otherwise, he's communicating to you guys all the time because you're all at different levels. Come to one level, make it easier on Dan. And then he knows, hey, at this type of situation, you guys need to know, there's a lockdown. That's probably one you might wanna know. And it might not even happen till after it's happened. Because the building principal's locking the building down and telling the soup. And the soup is doing some communications and then letting the board know. It's not infrequent that people in the community know stuff before me as the board chair and know even before the superintendent. Because they have students with cell phones and social media and all that. So it's like you were left out of the loop. Trust your superintendent that he's going through the steps to make sure safety's there first, and that he's making you aware. But you guys need to come up with a criteria, so he has all of you on board. What's a reasonable thing to respond to and how soon should we think? That just makes his job easier, makes your guys' job, so you're not worried and don't be scared when people know stuff beforehand. It's like, I've got only so much room in this thing, this big space up here for so much information, and I don't care if I do it first. So, that's kind of our last page. Listen closely and provide follow-up information to board members on concerns and issues. Refer to the superintendent. So when we have, so one of those is, it's emails and public comments is usually what that is. So when you get emails in, you wanna have the superintendent CC everybody, that's fine, you know, in the right circumstances. A lot of it is public comments, and I, as board chair, sometimes we don't have any public comments, sometimes there's statements, and if it's even gray, ask, would you like our superintendent to follow up? And they'll say yes, that's his job, he follows up. And then it's probably a good courtesy to CC the board, because then you guys might be wondering, you shouldn't ever wonder, did he follow up? But you should be privy to what he's following up with. Yeah, if you're wondering if he followed up, then you guys have communication issues already. Like you understand Dan's gonna do his job. He's gonna follow up with that comment at a board meeting. He's gonna CC you guys all, so you guys are all on the same page. But that to me is really keeping you guys in the loop. And then same with emails, your protocol that you're using right now is perfect. You're keeping Dan in the loop, you're keeping the rest of the board in the loop, and you're answering the ones that are appropriate to the board only, everything else gets forwarded to Dan.
Yeah, Dan's doing a great job at this. He has been. Yeah, this is phenomenal.
All right, so this is the big one. Super.
No, this one we're deleting that
Well, this whole
section.
section. So 21, recognition of the superintendent as the educational leader. And I would go beyond that. I would honestly say the educational expert. That's just not to huff your feathers, but I mean, you are the educational expert. You've spent the last 30+ years in this business and knows this business. And that's really who you need to lean into. So he wants you to recognize that. That means it's not a matter of second guessing, but it's a matter of building trust, and it'll take a little bit of time. You guys are already building trust with Dan. You experienced how he is already, and as those days and years go on, you'll have that trust. Like, okay, and he'll give you a great lens too. Like, I love running stuff by the superintendent. It's kind of like running it. So I own my own business. So I'm my own boss. It's kind of like Dan. He's really his own boss. Then he's got 7 bosses. Then he's got 1,600 students with 2 bosses and 1,600. So he's got thousands of bosses. But not one of those bosses ever says, hey, Dan, you're doing a great job. And hey, Dan, what would you do with this? Like, so to me, it's like, that's one of those things is where you need to, make sure that you're, you're collaborating with Dan and sharing those things, so.
Collaborate and listen, is that like, I don't know. It's getting late, I'm getting a little rummy, I'm.
Yeah, we're down to.
Soul
we're
clearing
down to
stuff
four.
through my head.
But so just
I
recognize
know, I
that,
know.
just recognize that Dan, he's the expert. And what I love about Dan too is he's not like, this is how it is. He's open to discussion, he's open to, alternatives, he's open to new information, he's a lifelong learner, and he's always growing. It's like, that's important that you have that, I don't like the people that fake it till they make it. We had a student that did that. He was very rigid, and he found out really the reason he was rigid is because he didn't have the confidence or the experience. But he wanted to give you that feeling that he did, but he didn't. And so it tells you a lot when someone has the ability to say that they're wrong. Yeah. Or that there's a different way to thinking. Yeah, we're being open to that. So that's my personal perspective. Share the successes and failures of the school system with the superintendent. Yep, bring it to him. Bring him the good, the bad, bring him the encouragement, bring him the thank yous, bring the chatter you're hearing and seeing, and let him do his job. But bring him all that feedback. You heard something at a football game, your child came home and asked this weird question about a teacher in school, bring him that information. He should never, I'm going out on them, he should never discourage you from bringing all the information. There's nothing better for superintendent to manage than having everything at his disposal. And you'll get to a point where you know what you share, and it's not worth sharing, that kind of thing, but bring the good and the bad, bring the gossip, bring everything, so he has all the tools. And that goes back to no surprises, they share it with him. There's things on your team, might as well be married to him, he's gonna find out what's happening, so just share it. And it makes his job a lot better. Show the district's staff the respect and consideration due, skilled professional employees in the public and at board meetings. This kind of goes without saying. So as we board members, you're walking in different shoes than you did before. People look at you differently. To my point earlier about posts, whether you like a post or don't like a post, it's just, unless it's like, hey, volleyball just won, 2-3 out of 5 sets, blah, 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 and you like it, that's something different than, I really can't stay in the Republican Party for this reason, you like it, it's like, you kind of give a little bit of that up. You technically don't by the Constitution, but you kind of do. You're now, you are working on behalf of all of the students, all of the family, all of the community members. And so you try to be as impartial and unbiased as you possibly can, publicly facing. You can have your own concerns, your own beliefs, all those other things. But when it comes to staff, you need to walk a very middle of the road. Walk it. It's important. Staff sees things, staff want to be encouraged, staff. You don't want, you talked about a teacher that's not performing well. That's a good conversation to have with your superintendent. That's not a good one to have on a soccer field with another parent. Because now you're looking like, wow, you're in a position to change that. If she can't change it, well then why isn't she telling Dan? Why isn't Dan getting rid of that teacher? It's like, it's so much more involved. It's not even worth the conversation. And there's all kinds of different little, like those techniques to keep your kids from taking drugs. There's a lot of avoidance language you can use. That's honestly effective, and it's not off-putting, and it removes you from being a conduit to that negative information. It's one thing to get feedback, but it's another thing to be, someone that's attracting all this negative information and trying to somehow solve it. So, and it hurts staff know quickly. And when you're out cheerleading, staff know that as well. So that's important. Inform the superintendent of all critical information. That is the, if I was a superintendent, that would be my mantra. No surprises, no surprises, no surprises. You guys are a team. When you know something, you share. Whether it's good, good's even better. It's like the bad's the easy thing to share. The good's the fun stuff to share. Take the time to share the good. Say, hey, I walked into a building today, and man, the superintendent or the principal of that building was greeting all the kindergartners the first day of school. That was cool. Text that to the superintendent. Like those are all like wins. Those are exciting. Those are the fun things to do that we kind of don't think of. We want more think of like, hey Dan, saw this, hey, and the sprinklers are on all summer long, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, I know the sprinklers are on, but like, to do the bad, and do the good too, it's encouraging, and it helps everybody, it's kind of fun to share that kind of stuff.
And I'll just, if I can just add something to that. You probably don't necessarily realize how important the staff think of, like us meeting in here today, like Deanne was here going, you know. Hey, here's where all this stuff is at, if you need this, here's where this is at, I made sure the custodians clean both restrooms. I mean, there was just a lot of just like, people coming through to make sure that this meeting was held. We had everything we needed here, besides all of Diane's work in preparing, but
Technology person.
yeah, Greg was here right at 3:30. I mean, there was all kinds of people that wanted to make sure this meeting went as well as possible. So I think that those kudos to folks do go a long way from you. Because I definitely know that there were several people showing up here to make sure we had what we needed, so.
They all like it, but everybody likes a pat on the back, honestly, and recognition. Abide by your own rules, policies, and this agreement. Mine was a smiley face, life is better when we do. So just, if you guys can come to agreement on these guardrails, for lack of a better term. Really what it comes down to, in my opinion, is your guys' trust, trusting one another, communicating helps build that trust. And trusting fellow board members and trusting your superintendent. And this just, you can't over communicate. Yeah, you're probably gonna go. It comes to emails and the texts and stuff. That's what helps him keep his job secure and knows that he's doing the right thing. So you guys are working with him as a team. So you guys just need to be able to trust each other, work hard at building that trust, keep those communication lines open and help Dan be successful. It reflects on everything. You don't get buildings built, you don't get bonds passed when people think there is adversity on your board, when people think that we have poor leadership, when people don't trust your buildings, your administrators, your school board, things like this don't happen. They don't just happen nowadays, especially. You try to pass a bond in North Marion today versus what was this 4 or 5 years ago. It's exponentially more difficult. It just is. So keeping a nice lens on your board, your district, your superintendent, your staff, your buildings is extremely important. And ultimately filters right down in the classroom and all of our kids prosper from that. So it's really that important. So. Any questions? I got us in under 20 minutes to spare.
We didn't have time to talk. I thought
Yeah.
we were gonna have some time.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Bill, I just wanna know, is there anything that you think is missing off of?
No, I think it does. I think you're honestly, so I looked at our board working agreement that we haven't tried in place for 8 years. And when Dan talked to me about this, I was thinking, we probably just need to resurrect that. I mean, well, things are, those Cs are nice and calm. And put that into place, because it's just a good way, and you get inundated, as your new board members up, and then just the freaking, all the little IEAs and all these different, whatever those called, the acronyms.
Yeah.
I could go the Bible on acronyms for education. Like, and I know you've done this, as new board members, you just shake your head. Like when a 3-letter word comes out, you're like, and then I wait till after the meeting, I still get it. Like I looked at your guys' SIP plan, you know how many times I heard SIP before I knew what SIP meant, your constant improvement plan? Like, I didn't even know what that meant, I heard it in 5 meetings before I like, kneel into the SIP. SIP, no, it's actually CIP, but it's like, those type of things. Yeah, so.
Well, Phil, I just wanna take a moment and recognize how amazing that was. I mean, from a person who sat on the board for like 6 years, I feel like any new board member needs to have like a rundown like that. I don't think I can give one that good, but I think it helps give a true authentic perspective of what it means really to be a board member, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it's a learning curve. There's a lot to it, but the way he finessed it to the language of, the things that you'll see, the real situations you'll face, like that's true authenticity of
being a board member where you have to be selfless and look for what's best for all the students. And sometimes that means you're gonna have unpopular opinions
You
to
don't,
people who don't know.
and you don't gain friends. If I had a chart of friends before I was on the school board, I have different friends now, some of the same, but you don't typically, the friend column doesn't increase. Just because eventually you cross some sort of subject that pisses someone off, and they're not friends, they're not friends anymore, it's a different relationship, and you give that up, and I'm like, okay, whatever, I got my wife.
So just thank you so much for
No, I
coming
appreciate
and
that.
taking time out of your
Absolutely.
day to
Yep.
really speak to us.
Yep, you betcha.
When you retire from school board, this could be a potential for you in the
Yeah,
future. Like,
I think it's interesting to have a school board, like I said, Kristen Miles, she's on the school board, I think it gives a good
Yeah.
perspective, like she's
Mhm.
living what she's teaching. I
right,
think that's kind of cool, it's a neat perspective, she's an OSBA trainer and she does a fantastic job, and she's actually was, elected last year to the Tigers Walton School.
Mhm.
Alright, cool, thank you guys, I appreciate it.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Phil.
yeah, you truly have a good one here.
Yeah.
And I was not paid to say that, in fact, before I left, I'm like, I haven't really asked what your board dynamics are, I said, on a 1 to 10, Dan, I texted him. 10 being like a high functioning school board, I'm thinking, like, for some reason, I was thinking maybe you guys might got here for, like, this is gonna be, this needs to work. He says, oh, they're usually an 8, 9, I'm like, I give like, 8, 9 is an A plus in my category, so. I was like, that's awesome, that's perfect. I
That
love it.
means
Thank you
there's room
guys.
to grow.
Okay. That sounds
Yeah.
good.
thank you so
You
much.
bet. Thank you guys, should we take our selfie? real
Yeah,
quick?
let's do, yeah,
All right.
you're gonna have to take your picture though,
Oh.
because I'm horrible at selfies.
Cheers. All right.
selfie for it.
Yeah, I'm supposed to take a picture.
Our, his attorney,
Yeah, I'm just-
our attorney, his friend, and then his sister.
Yeah.
Oh, you're still working at it?
Goodbye.
Drive safe.
Thank you.
All right,
Well, I do agree, you know, with Heidi to have some discussion. I will just leave with maybe two things and then hear from you. So, one of the things, you know, you stressed communication and over communication. And so one thing I told the principal team during the admin retreat, that my probably biggest fear when I say, and like kind of those literal, like what scares me is, you know, not knowing something I should know. You know, so not knowing something I should know. So I told the principals, I said, do not ever assume I know something. Like if you have this thought, like, is Dan thinking or is Dan aware? Please just say it, because it is something that, you know, that always worries me that I'm supposed to know something. And so I told the principals, do not ever assume I know something. I mean, obviously I try to stay very aware and stuff, but so please, you know, over communicate. And then the second thing is the last superintendent expectations of the board abide by its own rules, policy, and disagreements. And, you know, Jenny, you asked the question kind of earlier, you know, like a lot of this is in policy and stuff, and I'll just kind of close with, I think for me, that almost becomes the most important one to me. Because especially when it says this agreement, because if there's ever an instance where I feel like one of you's not abiding by this. Hopefully this doesn't come out as harsh, but
this is fierce conversation.
But if somebody isn't, you know, isn't willing to hold up to the rules, policies, and agreement, then that will tell me a lot about that board member. And I, you know, if someone all of a sudden goes, peace out, I can't abide by this because of whatever the situation, it's usually be centered around something that's, you know, controversial or something like that. But that to me is the most important one, because if they can't do that, then that will definitely change the way I will operate around that board member. You know, so I had one board member who in my previous district who would only find out information 30 minutes to an hour before something became public, because it could not be trusted. that would stay where it needed to stay. And so I would intentionally go right 30 minutes before something goes public. Give the call. So, and that's because the superintendent agreement wasn't being followed. And so I just wanna end with, that's my most important one, because I just wanna be able to point to this if there ever is a conflict, and work through what did we agree on, not that we're not. Whatever the issue might have brought to the table, we can address that, but are we holding to what we agreed to? And that's a two-way street for you, from you to me as well. So,
Yeah, that's really what I got out of the agreement too, is it is both ways. You know, we have to agree to trust each other and communicate with each other.
To trust something, I think that you can assume up front, and that's a good assumption. Like Phil said, I'm going to assume that everyone likes me until I find out otherwise. Then I have to acknowledge the truth, but on the other hand, it is something that you earn rather than demand, earn over time. Like Superintendent says, if you earn mistrust because you violated it too many times.
You're
That's what you
confirming
learn.
it, you're confirming trust or you're confirming
Yeah.
distrust.
You're earning it
Yeah.
or you're letting it slip away.
Mhm.
So Heidi, you wanna start us off on a roundtable on this? How much time do we have?
we have 13, it's 7:47. So,
It's 7:47.
yeah, so.
I just want to ask an operating question. When we're at a board meeting, it's always this awkward, and this isn't just this has been ever since I've been on the board, it's always this way. There's this awkward portion of who's gonna make the motion, you know, I move that we accept, whatever. You know, and I think, well, I'll let other people, you know, have turns. So it's been done different ways on a board. Sometimes just one person seems to do it all the time. Other times it's been, you know, everybody takes a turn. I don't know. How do we want to do this? So we don't have this awkward, like, you know. Was that?
I feel the same, yeah, it's always like, okay, who's gonna make it?
You know, because I like to have everybody have a chance.
Yeah.
Do you know how boards have done it? Like. How even random to me.
It's always been pretty random. I think the more success it has is honestly how the board chair kind of delivers it. You know, kind of that readiness to, I'll accept a motion, you know, hearing no further discussion, you know, trying to kind of prime it so that someone feels like I'm ready to, as soon as she's done, I'm ready to jump on that. But it has been awkward in other places as well. So.
I think Crystal said it though, it's the more extroverts that aren't uncomfortable speaking up, and I know. Me personally, I tend to be more of an introvert. And
Adopted by an extrovert.
adopted by an extrovert, I'm really learning, and I'm trying really hard to be like more outspoken.
I think too, I know I've observed it in another meeting that I regularly attend once a month. There are certain people in that group, it's a larger group, of course, but there are 3 or 4 that they just want their name on the minute list, and I don't care.
Yeah.
I vote how I want to vote, but. And then I was down at the Oregon Legislative Hearing Committee, and one lady always made the motion, just always made the motion. I thought, what is with this? You just jumped on it. I finally realized that's their protocol. She was the vice chair. They had come to a conclusion on the hearing. That was her job. Here I was faulting her. I shouldn't have done that. But I feel kind of that same unsettledness too. I want to always be the one who does, but don't want to never be the one who does.
I like
Why
this.
there for some reason.
Yeah, I like to second because I get unsure of how to
Strikes your motion.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes there's the,
So
you know,
yeah,
sometimes, you know, 'cause some of the motions get
Yeah.
long, and it's like, okay, how do you word that? How do you make sure that it's, you know,
Captured, yeah.
captures what you, captures what the, you know, what you want in it. There's also, I mean, I've been to meetings where it's like. The motion is brought forward by somebody who maybe is near and dear to, if they have a standing committee, if they have. You know, if they've done some committee work on it, if they've done, I mean, so I don't know as if we, you know, I mean, it may be more orderly, but. I don't know, we probably won't, we probably won't get
like
away
to
from
see
the credit
everybody
policy.
have a chance, you know, just because you're a quiet person or whatever. You should still have that opportunity if you know, if you want it, so I don't want people to get stepped on.
Yeah, and like, that's, there's nothing wrong with that perspective, so.
I acknowledge that feeling though, of like, okay, this.
Every month I feel high now.
What?
I get hyped now for next song.
I'm
You're
good.
after that. Bro, this is great. Yeah.
Okay, so our time is to end at 8, and I wanna respect that. So what do we wanna do about this board operating agreement?
I wanna make a
Jenny, you
motion
have.
to. Wait,
There was no action.
oh, bro, let's try to get out there.
Next time.
I think we all noodle on it for.
I would like this taken care of by the end of the month.
Agreed, I can agree with that.
I wanna make a motion for
Someone who's
that.
seen a lot of board operating agreements. This is as good as any.
I know, right?
They're all about the same, this is great, it covers most of the stuff, yeah, let's go.
I liked the
Next time.
content, it helped a lot.
Mhm.
The rest of them, I was like, whatever. But the content behind it on the why, I'm a very much a why person, so that really helped me.
I think that this is a good one, you know, I've been through a lot of board agreements. I feel like it's a little combination of. Wilson Mill and reason. Anyway,
South Albany,
Um,
South Line.
I like that that's still it. I think what was very helpful for you guys was to have Bill here. I think that was probably the most helpful thing this entire evening. I think maybe the public meetings thing was a little more for you, but it's like, I already know all that stuff. You know what I mean? For me.
Yeah.
I'm the one who does the executive session ORSs, but you know, I think it's great that you learn, because then you know. And your do's and your don'ts. But anyway, back to this operating agreement, I like it, I wouldn't be opposed if you feel like you needed to. Tweak it, I mean, I made little notes, you made little notes, you know, spend 10 minutes on it September 30th. And then you can adopt it.
And we can adopt it, but
Yeah.
September, or do we need to have that in a business meeting, work session?
You know, they don't make it a habit, but it's okay.
Okay.
And could we send our odd comments, one or two, or
Like we did for policy?
like we did for policies and get them to you within a week? A chance to,
Yeah, why don't you send them to me? Would you like a kind of a version of this that you could edit on? Or would you rather just send me an email? Or actually, I can do both. I don't really care.
No, I think just this right here that says what part of the green that it falls under and then the number. Oh, well, they're all numbered individually, so you can just put the number in your comment. And then we can bring it up for discussion at the work session, because there's only 7 of us. So then we can decide, you know, does it fit? Is it content? Is it non-content? You know what I mean? And just real quickly at the work session, be able to decide and finalize. Does that sound okay?
So I think for kind of the public meeting serial communication, send them to me.
Yeah,
We will
right.
put them together, kind of like we did with board policy.
Mhm,
Okay,
exactly, with
Alright.
the number.
yes.
That work?
I would just reiterate, I like your presentation. Staff pays attention. Way more than we realize, a lot. And so. We need to be cognizant of that.
They
They are-
actually watch behavior at board meetings.
They do. They pay attention to a lot of stuff that probably we don't think that they're, you know, when we're discussing policy, when we're discussing performance or his performance or what, you know, they pay attention us a lot. And so I would just reiterate that, and giving kudos to, that's probably one of the things I learned as chair. I didn't always agree with what, my superintendent was doing, but being supportive greases a lot of wheels and keeps, the district moving along and going in a direction that is good for our kids. I like how he always brought it back to, what's important for the kids, so. Sorry, that's my little pontificate, but. But I really appreciate his, like you said, the whys that, that went into that, so.
Yeah, that was so good,
It was.
so good. So, are you good?
I'm good.
Number two, to bounce that before we end. So here's what's going on. On September 30th, that's our work session, but that's also the fall regional roadshow. So we have really, I'm thinking of two different ways we can do this. If somebody wants to go to the September 30th OSBA roadshow, we can have you as like our rep that's there and keep our work session. If more than one of you wanna go and hear what they have to say at the road show, then we can look at moving it, but this has to be done before. Okay, I'll bend and say October 1st. But, so that's because this work session on the 30th is to finish our policies, and our hard goal was October 1st. So we need, so either. Does anybody wanna go to the road show?
Yeah. I'm not here.
Earl, do you wanna go to the road show?
I went last year. I am not disinterested, but if we were meeting, I would work home.
It is free dinner.
It's on, regular or vegetarian?
Speaking of language.
Usually lasagna with both, but
Okay, good. Road show,
No, I'm working.
okay. What are you thinking?
I think it's more important to do the policy stuff.
Okay.
If
Alright.
just.
Yeah.
Me, but
So,
I've been to both,
Yeah.
obviously I've been to that, but I
Yeah.
I feel like my vote
Oh,
for the policy is way more important.
Okay.
So.
so we're in consensus that we're keeping the September 30th. Merrill, if you have some heartburn and you wanna go to the road show, you can, just let me know ahead of time. But I would really like to keep our,
It wasn't worth it. Just wasn't-
you'll, your contribution is more valuable at the workshop.
I would agree.
yeah. So,
You're gone.
I am, I'm fine.
Heidi's turn to be vacation.
I'll be the same. Here's,
I have a question for you. Are we
Yeah.
continuing on with the ASB updates?
Yes. Yes,
That's, I really appreciate it.
it's on, we had a agenda setting meeting and it was on there to
Yes.
introduce them. Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
I'll have the agenda tomorrow, but.
Yeah, I keep forgetting it's Tuesday. So just to recap really quick, so for my own, we're keeping the September 30th board agenda work session as we originally planned. So there will be no movement on that. And then all of us do we have a deadline that we want this done by? Questions? Is Friday good?
Like the reviews back,
Yeah,
back to Dan.
to Dan. Friday? Or we can do Monday.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have anything by Friday, please, to Dan, email.
Thank you.
Can I ask you one question?
Yeah,
And I don't have any heartburn either way, I really don't care that much. Are we doing board goals this year?
it's on my to-do list, so. I would, Heidi, but like you, if I'm gonna make a goal. I wanna see like movement or action or a data point or a follow-up or,
I
You know what I mean?
I've had 16 years of my whole evolution process on board goals, it's like, and I'm at the point now where I'm like. Make them very simple, very succinct. Just dovetail them right under our strategic plan.
Yes.
We have, so like we want academically, let's just pick like 3% in mathematics or something like that, like you were saying, and. Make them just real easy, you know, and let's just vote on them. Let's not debate them for, because we've debated them for hours. We don't make headway, nobody really cares about it anyway, because we don't do anything with them. You know what I mean? Unless we're, so that's my 2 cents about it.
Okay, noted.
I would say, I would ask you a question, how is it going with, simplifying the strategic, like the theories of act and that kind of stuff?
This was a perfect segue to that. So on Monday's board meeting, Desiree will kind of give an overview of the theories of action and the simplifications. And what I'm really happy about is the principals are working them with their leadership teams and simplifying and getting their feedback and working on them. So Desiree is gonna give a little bit of a, probably not 20,000, maybe 10,000 foot level of here's what we're trying to get to. And then we have the middle school and high school principals scheduled to report on their theories of action on the October board meeting. Intermediate school at the November board meeting, primary school at the December board meeting, focus on their theories of action and trying to simplify them.
Nice.
So,
Great, that sounds good.
yeah,
I love hearing from the different principals. Sometimes we only hear from one person every meeting and it gets kind of old. It's nice to hear from, it is nice to hear from the principals once or twice a year.
yeah. No, I think twice a year is perfect, so get them, was able to get them lined up through November or October, November, December. And then, try to see if we can, get March, April, I know May starts to get crazy, but kind of something like that, so.
Did Kinder come in where projections were?
Bill asked me that, I said, I should probably know that. They haven't actually, so today was their second kind of day, so Kinder all. So, yeah, so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've been, kind of going to Linda and she's like, I'm just waiting for Linda to come and tell me when I need to know that, so.
Awesome.
That's when the official count is,
October 1st.
but
Yeah.
you don't have 77 kids now, you probably are gonna have it in October.
Yeah.
Right. All right, so, we are past time, but any last minute things? Comments? Good?
I won't be here Monday.
Okay. You want me there? Will we have a quorum?
I was here last night.
Will we really have a quorum though? Heidi, are you gone Monday? Okay.
I made a mistake and I showed up last night and I couldn't figure out. Oh, that's right.
You know what?
That's my fault for not changing it on my calendar.
That happens.
You're not here on Monday?
Jenny's been reminding me of my meetings.
Yeah,
So Heidi's here Monday,
I'm here.
here.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have that. You're good.
Adjourn your meeting.
I don't know, Dan, is it? Yes, meeting adjourned.
And we